session to order. Now you can go.
Sorry about that.
Our item A on the agenda is smart scale project funding. It says Allison, so you're gonna kick this off, Allison?
Yes, I have here a familiar face, Alan Saunders with VDOT, and Josh is also in the audience, and Patrick Monty from Rappahannock Regional Commission. Here to talk to you this evening about smart scale funding, potential projects, just kind of an open discussion relating to smart scale in general. Alan and I were catching up on his way here on what we wanted to talk about, and we thought maybe, if you wanted to talk about what projects were applied for the last cycle of funding, what we were awarded, what we were not awarded, and then milestones that we need to meet or at least have in mind if there's any interest from the board to apply for smart scale funding this cycle. And then potential projects that have been identified for smart scale funding, and possibly even a little bit of discussion about revenue sharing, which will be the funding cycle that will open up next year. So it's kind of what we talked about. I'm going to turn it over to Alan, and then of course Josh and Patrick are here as well, and
Okay.
we'll go from there.
All right. You have a presentation you're gonna walk us through to start with, or you wanna just
I did not
start?
prepare
Okay,
a
well, that's fine.
presentation. I didn't. I wanted to very quickly just talk about Route 601 and the schedule and where
Right.
it's beginning. And then the smart scale application milestones that are coming over the next 2 months. Well, really, at the end, we're gonna be in June for that, June the 1st or of the next month. And what the process was follow as we approach September, when the official deadline. Then we had several things that have been going on in the county. The quarter study that you've been doing with the Germano Wilderness Area Plan. We had a couple of applications that we put in last time that were selected. And then we've had some new ideas that have come up as well, recommendations from the traffic engineers about other projects that could be good candidates for smart scale funding.
Okay.
So the first smart scale application that we've submitted and was funded was the Route 601 curve. That project, the funding will begin to trickle onto that project in $200,000 to $300,000 chunks over the next 4 fiscal years. And then the construction funding will come online primarily in the last fiscal year, which is 2023. So the design will begin, the scoping really for the project will begin this fall. The funding will come online July the 1st. July the 1st, we'll begin to identify, based on crash history, where the crashes have occurred, defining the purpose and need and goals and scope of that project.
Is that you're doing that work in-house, or is that gonna be a contracted work, or?
We
scoping
will
work?
we'll do this design in-house.
Okay,
We'll design this in-house. We'll meet with affected property owners, go over their concerns, we'll look through the crash industry, or crash history, we'll review the design requirements with you, the board, and then from there, begin to craft the scope of the project. Once we've crafted the scope of the project, we would have a public hearing that would be scheduled probably within 18 months, so sometime in early 2020.
and is that a smart scale requirement? Or
It is a federal aid
Okay, oh, okay.
requirement.
Yeah, okay.
It is. For federal aid projects, we'll follow their prescribed, FHWA prescribed, project development life cycle, which would include a public hearing. And that would get feedback, and ultimately that drives the final design. So we wouldn't begin the final design process until 2020. In 2020, the final roadway geometry would be determined, the final design, then 100% plans would be created. Then, based on feedback, we would finish the design, enter the right-of-way and utility relocation phase if we have to acquire right-of-way or relocate any utilities, and that typically takes another year. And then we would get to construction in 2023.
As you might recall, and it's probably a little bit longer term than what you're talking about with this project, but we, as part of the Germano Wilderness Area Plan, that road, Route 601, potentially could become a much more heavily used an important artery inside that plan area to create sort of a loop. So my question is there a way to, while you're scoping the project and looking at designs and sightings and right-of-ways, to think forward at least a little bit in anticipation of a more broadly scoped project to enhance that road someday? It'd be a shame to spend money and not have it, you know, it's the old railroad that doesn't meet kind of a deal. I have visions of, you know, ending up doing something that has to be redone or doesn't
Would we,
provide a lasting solution. So I just remind you basically of that.
would we need to provide more of a scope of what we expect for that road in terms of,
Well, that's a question to Al. I mean, you've seen that. I don't know if you recall the specifics, but there's a, you know, fairly substantial improvement
And I
contemplated to that.
about 4-lane
Had that
divided
with me.
kind of
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, potentially 4-lane divided, and I mean, you know, a big project. And all I'm saying is there any way to sort of
Look at it-
recognize those pieces?
Look at it from that standpoint and saying, okay, what we're doing now isn't gonna be erased
Sure.
when we get to that point. Or, in doing this, you know, modify what we do so as to be compatible with what would be, downstream a few years.
Or to the extent possible, if that wasn't, if we couldn't figure out a way to do that, that we, within the scope of the project that was selected, try to minimize the improvements that we're making so that we're not throwing away a dollar.
Okay, I mean, just,
But
That's really the point, yeah.
yeah,
within the framework of smart scale, if we stray from the established scope of the project too much, we may ultimately need to rescore it. And then it may vary
Okay.
the criterion of which it was based and it was selected along to begin with. So if we stray from the scope too much, then it would possibly need to be rescored. And if it's rescored, it may not score as well as it did before. And we may lose the funding. So in that scenario, we could certainly look at that, and we need to. We would have a duty to look at that to make sure
yeah,
that
and
nothing
it
we're
may,
doing.
it may be that you can't make any changes without, losing the project as it is.
And we wouldn't want to jeopardize that. So in that extent, if we knew that there were going to be some improvements coming, instead of trying to expand the scope of the project to link into future improvements, we would really look at the scope that we've got to see if, is there a way to narrow this down and save a tax dollar and still gain the ultimate goal that we were initially trying to achieve, which was a safety improvement. And then again, to make sure that we didn't do anything that would jeopardize the funding and lose it. If you change the scope too much based on those 5 criterion that it was originally scored against, and its score would be modified significantly, we may be in jeopardy of losing.
One of the reasons I asked a question about, are you doing the work in-house, is you, at a minimum, you can have those conversations.
You're right.
And
We can, and we have the project manager and the lead designer for the project has been involved with several other smart scale projects and is very flexible. He's a good engineer. So between Justin Warfield and John Rose, and then William Stowe, who is their manager, Jonathan Stowe, that they are a very rational engineers and can really think outside, well, why don't we try this, or what do you think about that? And where are your entrances gonna be, and who are your residents, and how are they gonna use this property in the future? And is there a way
What's
to
the new
accommodate
major
that?
access or something like that to a
Right.
new development? Okay.
And we will go through all of those things just to craft the scope of the project before we ever go to public hearing or really begin the design. That's just preliminary work in order to get to public hearing.
Well, the only thing you really have, if you're talking about straightening out the curve, is because the one section, there's a little bit of property on the other side. But otherwise, it runs pretty much right along the lake.
And
So that would be your inner loop, I guess, anyway. And the only place you have any issue is if you come around the other curve, the land falls off a little bit. So maybe a minor tweak on that. Besides that, it should just kinda go with what y'all had in mind.
And from what Alan said in the past, safety improvements is about all we're going to get out of this particular smart scale.
It is, and in many instances, if we've just increased the runoff area, there are a lot of skid marks in that curve. if we provide a way for them to see to the inside of the curve, improve sight distance, so they know how steep it is, we provide additional signage, maybe some guardrail, that, within the focus of improving safety, the traffic engineers have a lot of tools in the toolbox that doesn't necessitate a major realignment, either vertical or horizontal. So they've got a lot of tools that we could look to deploy, some new innovative things that would draw attention to the curves and help improve safety and just work within that framework. But those are all things that we would consider going into this fall and over the next year as we would prepare for public hearing.
A couple of months ago, I saw some people out there doing some survey work along that. You know, is that some advanced preparation for that, or what?
It was twofold. We have a citizen there at just south of that curve, and we had some obligations to that citizen in a prior right-of-way agreement that were never met. So we were out there doing some survey work for a project from years past where we had a right-of-way agreement that we didn't fulfill our obligation to, that we were rectifying.
Okay.
And then in addition to that, we took opportunity while we were there to do some preliminary surveying for the curve.
Okay, all right.
That's why we were there.
Well, I didn't mean to
Well,
derail
that
the
was just
conversation about.
that was the
smart
first
scale,
bullet.
but-
So that was the first bullet, really, is to go over 601, because I think that lays the framework for the next section. Now we're about to apply, or at least consider projects for applications for the next round. The deadline to provide notice to the department of the counties, the localities' intent to submit is June the 1st. And we're preparing projects across the spectrum of the Culpeper District now for applications and supporting the localities. And the hardest part is, even though we've been talking about this now for months, the hardest part has been narrowing down. Each locality gets 4 projects. And what are those 4? And what do we want to do? So we could identify 4, we can talk about if you have a major project along your quarter study that we want to begin to plan for in the next smart scale cycle. What can we do over the next 2 years to begin preparing for that, so in the next cycle, we're ready to hit that project hard? Is there a revenue sharing opportunity where if we have a project and we want to try to bankroll, or put aside some funding to help offset the smart scale cost for that project, its score will be improved. Again, it's not the total cost of the project, it's the amount of smart scale funds that we need that are weighed in the score of that project. So if you have a $10 million project and you're only asking for $1 million in smart scale funds, you've offset the other 9 with another revenue source, it's gonna score better.
Does right-of-way dedication count in any way as either cost sharing or as another source of revenue? There's,
In scoring it, you mean?
well,
It's,
yeah, does it, we did enter into the scoring, meaning having right-of-way provided as opposed to you guys having to require it?
Private property owner dedicated right of for
Could you
substantial,
quantify that?
qualify the present value of that.
Mr. Monty?
It would.
It's something that I can follow up on the city.
Well, there's a project that we, hopefully we'll talk about here in a minute, that would involve a fairly substantial amount of right-of-way to complete. And it could be quite expensive unless we can work another deal with the property owner.
It's part of the access management plan study that's underway right now,
Right.
relocating 320 to the west
Okay.
and having a substantial amount of the right-of-way, all the right-of-way on the south side from 20 back, from 3 back to 20 donated.
If,
Or pass through the county, I mean, there
Yeah,
are any number of mechanisms that are possible, but it would, potentially would not involve you guys having to purchase right-of-way.
Right.
That's a better way of saying it.
and if there's a way to quantify that and show it as a contribution to the project, if that would help reduce the smart scale. It's a great question. It is, and it's one that we can find out. Or if there's some way to show that in your,
That'd be our
and your
portion
ledger.
of the revenue sharing would come, if it came through us, to be our portion of the revenue sharing on that project. Something like that, would that work?
Yeah,
That's a great
that's really the question is what, how do we get this included in the scoring calculation?
I mean, whether it's revenue sharing funds that you match $1 million with $1 million from the state, or you have right-of-way donation, Smart Scale's not so much concerned with what the total cost of the project is, so if the project is $30 million and you get right-of-way donated of $8 million, what they're gonna do is score that project on the $22 million cost that you're asking for from Smart Scale, so there's a benefit there. It's not so much, accounted for in terms of, oh, they brought down 25% of the project cost, but the way your project is scored.
Well, that's a positive, clearly, if you can get a $30 million project for 22 million.
Yeah, it just doesn't show up in the.
Yeah, well, that's
In the accounting on Smart Scale, but that would be a benefit in the scoring.
okay.
Now, for revenue sharing, I don't wanna jump completely off stream, but while we're talking about this topic, for revenue sharing, if there's a project and it already has funding dedicated to it, it will score better or move it up to another tier, right? Move it up from tier 2 to tier 1 if it already has funding allocated to it.
If you have funding through revenue sharing allocated to it. I'm not sure if you just have funding. I mean, if you're bringing a larger match than the one-to-one match on revenue sharing, then I would say that would probably be better. But I don't think it's so much if you're just saying, this 50% match no matter what.
And still don't know if we could quantify the right of way, but it's still,
I'd have to look
it's a
at that.
question, yeah, okay. So
Well,
we'll
the
look at
project I'm
both
talking about
scenarios.
is the 320 intersection issue that the corridor study has identified and is looking at options for. And one of the options would be to relocate at least a segment of that intersection to the west on 3, and then relink back to 20
Actually,
through a
that'd make
different.
it a four-way intersection.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I thought that was a great idea, and it significantly improves the sight distance at the intersection, cues
But
back to that.
We haven't, as far as I know, we do not have the report from the corridor study yet. I know it's
Actually,
getting close, but,
Well, Zach's done, I'm gonna share it with the steering committee
Well, I
here
hope I
shortly. In
didn't-
fact, I just talked to him. Some of it shows potential alignments across private property on new alignments, so I wanted to be careful
Okay.
that we
That
weren't
makes sense.
disclosing. I think when we last talked about this, was the concept of this would be an intersection, a safety, or not a safety, but a congestion mitigation project by moving the intersection of 320 from its current alignment west to align with, and relocated that it comes down to 20 by the battlefield. And then this would be mirrored to the north by that collector road. Remember how we would, and that whole sub-area 4 then has the economic development potential. And I think the story, the narrative we were trying to weave is one dealing with, capacity, congestion mitigation, and economic development, and with a private sector and opening up property for economic development.
but the other question is it time in the smart scale schedule of things, is it time to start talking about that project, or is this wait another year before you start talking about that kind of a project?
For that scale of project, there's an expectation, the standard of care that I've seen between the localities and the submission varies. Some localities have engineering teams that work for them. Other localities don't have a public works engineer. So the standard of care for which they're applying varies. The key is to sharpen the pencil on the design and advance the design enough so that you have a very solid estimate.
Yeah, he's got estimated costs for this. Zach has, I've seen them, I mean, they're, whatever the factor, they're millions of dollars. This is not a small project by any means. So probably the next step, and I'm just tying this up now, is to have this draft study presented to the 3 board members who's been involved in the steering, and then bring the other 2 in. This is part of a presentation that would be at Locust Grove Middle School,
Okay.
which is the last piece of the corridor study that Baker Associates had to do. But it takes I've seen it now, but it's got a lot of the new engineering, I guess to put it. It's like new math, it's new engineering on intersections.
And I think, to answer Mr. White's question, with what I do know about the smart scale, we're probably better off to do a really good plan and get, with the regional commission, get it put on the regional commission's radar for the next cycle, because
I mean, that's my sense of it, is we couldn't be ready this year to do much more than to, sort of
and also.
wave a few arms and say this is.
If we tie it in through the regional commission, it's even possible that we may be able to do it through 2 regions. Is this correct, Patrick, as far as the benefits side of it, not necessarily doing it through 2 regions, but the benefits would be through 2 different regions?
Well, I mean, in terms of a smart scale project, I think if you're thinking of like Fauquier County asking the commission to submit, or,
But, yeah, one of those would be similar, but because of the safety and congestion benefit, it actually affects Spotsylvania County on the congestion side.
and yeah, I agree with that, and I think that would show up, you would see that show up in scores. You know, whether they could get, that's actually an interesting point. I don't know if you could tie it in enough to where they would say, because if the project physically is in Orange County, that would be in Cook River District, even though the benefits are being accrued elsewhere.
Right. But, I mean, and that's one reason I think that wait for the next go-round, because we can get a lot of those questions answered as to,
Okay.
and the regional commission can be very beneficial to us as far as this whole process goes as well.
Well, I've taken both stances and to try to answer your question too, that the philosophy where we have a project, we have a traffic study, we have a general concept sketch of what it is we hope to accomplish for the scope of work. We have a conservative estimate, because once the smart scale project is selected, the smart scale funding that you receive paints the framework for the project. You cannot exceed that funding. But the locality has to contribute the rest, or we have to find it from another source. So if we have a project scope, we have a need, it meets a V-Trans need, as identified by V-Trans, we have a traffic study, then we'll prepare, as an advocate for you, that's our job, a application and submit it and see what sticks.
Well, one of the
Or
reasons-
we go through and review it. So we can spend a couple of years, and 3 and 20 doesn't, both of those are primary, and we're talking about our secondary 6-year plan. But 601 is a secondary route. You have some funding that's available in your secondary 6-year plan that we could create a line item for a study to do some additional work over the next couple of years and refine the scope of work for a 601 realignment project, just as seed money to then prepare for the next round. So we can look at that same philosophy either way. We can quickly try to put something together if we have enough information to submit and see how it scores, or we can plan and prepare.
Well, the one other factor that I'm hearing bits and pieces about that I don't know about, apparently you guys are planning to do some level of renovation and safety enhancement to the 3 and 20 intersection very soon. And sort of back to the same conversation we had about 601. If in fact a smart scale project would happen to do a major rethinking of that intersection over the next couple of years, you're back to that. How much do you do now in anticipation of really solving the problem? Because what I'm hearing is that there are only fairly minor Band-Aids that can be done given the current geography.
Right.
That if you don't move it, you're really severely constrained.
You're up against the structure to the east.
Yeah, and so again, it's one of those, do you get out in front of it, at least in conversation, to say, let's be cautious about what we do in the short term, because what we really should be focused on is solving the problem once and for all, with a smart scale project to come.
If we completed the quarter study 2 years ago, then I think we would be at a place now for 3 and 20 to make some strong, solid decisions about whether or not we do the planned safety improvements or not. For now, since even if we applied for funding now for 3 and 20 intersection improvements through Smart Scale, it would be selected for funding next year. And it would be 5 years from then, 6 years from then, once it was selected. So we're up into 2025 before those improvements would ever come. And so we would go ahead and move
We'd still
forward.
go ahead with the existing,
We would.
how much is committed, that improvement that you're committed to now?
It's approximately $400,000 to $600,000.
Right.
And we've got,
You were supposed to start construction this summer?
we are supposed to start. We're waiting for federal because we're using a real innovative approach on that project. And we're still seeking federal authorization to use the innovative approach, which is a combination of other federal aid projects and state forces to significantly lower the cost of the work. So we've been working with the Federal Highway Administration for 8 months, just to get their approval to open the funding for us to spend it.
Well, in that case,
So-
Smart Scale may come before this project.
We're this close, we're this close. The initial estimate for that work was about 1.3, and we think we can bring it in at less than 600,000 by using the strategy that we want. So in that instance, we looked at, okay, 7 years from now, how many crashes could we prevent?
Sure.
Fatalities, injuries, if we went ahead and did that work. So we made the decision, it's safety funds, let's spend it, let's try to make it safer in the interim,
All right.
until we can get something, some of the same philosophy that we applied at 2231 with, let's get some interim pavement markings and signage and something there, just to bridge the gap between now until we get our roundabout to make it safer. What can we do now?
Okay.
So in that, we talked about the schedule on 601, we talked about some of the deadlines for Smart Scale. The pre-application submission deadline is June the 1st, and then the full application submission deadline is August. So we would work with you and Josh to refine the scopes of work and the applications and make sure that we get those submitted by the deadline.
Do you have projects in mind?
We have several project recommendations, we do. But I think the first one, which would be a good project, is the 20 and 522 roundabout. If that's something that the county still supports, the last application that we submitted, we prepared it very quickly, and the estimate was high, over $8 million, which the recent roundabouts that we just built at Palmyra was a little over $2 million. So I know those are future dollars, but that estimate was simply too high. So we've discussed some opportunities to realign 671, 617, 671, over to Everona to clean up the roundabout, the framework. We have
That's one of the problems that you have is
have a lot of right-of-way there, and we have a lot of opportunity. I think that we can reduce the cost estimate significantly, and it would score much better. So there's one opportunity right there.
Can that one be ready for a June application, you think?
Absolutely. We would simply continue to refine the estimate, which the LMD, I've already asked them to start our location design section. I've already asked them to start working on it just to refine it, just in hopes that we can get that down significantly, that we would be ready. So I've asked them to look at that. The study, if the quarter study doesn't provide any fruit now, again, that's something that through revenue sharing and our secondary 6-year plan for any of the routes that might fall off of a primary like 601, and I apologize, I'm losing my voice a little bit. We could do some preliminary studies. Some of the funding that you have in your secondary 6-year plan, it's tele-fee funds, those can be used for anything. And if you wanted to create a line item in your secondary 6-year plan to do some preliminary studies or further investigations in preparation for either revenue sharing next year or the next cycle of Smart Scale, we could do that too. There were if there's anything, again, if we're not ready for the arterial plan, our traffic engineers have prepared several studies and looking for opportunity projects. Thankfully, some of them on their list, and I can email this to Allison. They've gone through and looked at probably the top intersections across the entire area, the entire district. But it's specific to Orange, they've ranked them. We have a top 100 list that we prepare for our entire district. And that's based on how many crashes have been at that intersection over a 5-year period, 2011 to 2017, December 2017. The frequency, so over the past 5 years, how many of those years had a crash? How many of them were fatal? How many of them were injuries? And then we rank them, top 100. So in Orange County, we have Route 20 and 231. That's our #1 crash history project. That's funded, we're taking care of it. Route 20 and 611 was another one, it's ranked 19th. The Spotswood Trail, Route 33 and Route 20, that's ranked 83rd. And we have a lot of crash history that in those two intersections, the western 2033 has the highest volume of crashes. The eastern 2033 intersection has the highest injuries. So both of those are two more projects that would make good candidates. Route 33 and Governor Barber Street, 678. But in this list, one of the things that, again, I try to keep in the back of my mind are all the acronyms. We've talked about crash modification factors. We've talked about potential for safety improvements, PSI. And when the traffic engineers look at an intersection, they try to gauge, okay, what can we do? Yeah, there's a lot of crashes here, but is it in a box? Are the sides open? Is it a railroad overpass? Do we have any potential here to do something to improve the safety? And that's its PSI. Low PSI, it doesn't have a lot of potential. High PSI, we've got a nice wide open area like 25, 22. We could easily put a roundabout here and it would significantly improve safety. So its potential for safety improvement is high. Now the crash modification factor. Roundabout has a very high crash modification factor. You put in a roundabout, you're gonna look at an 80% reduction in injuries at that intersection on average. So 1 minus 0.8 is 0.2. So it's low CMF, but in reality, that's very high. A left turn lane does not have a good crash modification factor because while you may reduce the number of head-on serious injuries, you may create more rear-end crashes. And the reason I add the CMF into the discussion is we may have a top 100 intersection like 20 and 611. But adding a left-hand turn lane is not going to score very well for Smart Scale. We could try it. There may be another intersection solution that the traffic engineers, if you wanted us to look at that, could come up with. I don't know if another big roundabout would be the answer at that location, or if there was some other type of improvement that they could recommend. But that is certainly one that has a high.
roundabout there would significantly jack up the cost,
It would,
thereby making it tougher to compete in the Smart Scale.
right. So when we look at the crash frequency at 20 and 611 is pretty low. But the total, 5-year total is high, and that's why it's ranked where it's at. So we would, once we identified candidates, we'd go back to the traffic engineers, and they would have to give us information back about, yes, while we have a lot of crashes there, it has there's an opportunity for this intersection type that has a high crash modification factor. It has a lot of potential for safety improvements. Alan, please go back and recommend to them, that's a great selection for Smart Scale. Or there's a project over here that while it has a lot of potential, we don't have any alternatives there that's gonna score well. So instead of using the Smart Scale revenue stream, let's look for revenue sharing. Let's try to apply for HSIP, the Highway Safety Improvement Funds, and they can do that. The Route 2231 is a prime example of that. That wouldn't have scored well in Smart Scale, but it scored very well for HSIP. So it got Highway Safety Improvement Funds, and that's how we're advancing that project. So in all of the revenue streams, we would have to look at the project need, pair it up with a revenue stream, and then make a determination as to which is which. So as I'm looking down the list and I get to 33 and 20, that's one where they did feel there's a high potential for safety improvement, and they have some ideas, even though it's tight, for some mini roundabouts that have mountable central islands that a tractor trailer could easily navigate over, that has a big crash modification factor, so that might be a good project as well. And then as you get a little bit
When
further
you say
down the
good,
list.
is that a Smart Scale?
Smart Scale.
Candidate? Okay.
Smart Scale. And so we have the 2522, the 20 and 611. That one could be one that we could ask the traffic engineers to come back and look at. The 33 and 20 is another one. We've met recently with, I wasn't at the meeting, but thankfully Josh was there and Patrick was there, where we met with the town of Gordonsville and High Street. So there's 2 intersections within the town of Gordonsville that they did a study for in 2012. And one is right there across from the barbecue exchange off of 15 and High Street. And the other one is at the other end at 231. Those are also 2 prime locations for roundabouts. They have a high probability of potential for safety improvement. And then the safety improvement for the room that we've got could include something that has a high crash modification factor. So those 2, both of those intersections would be good candidates. So 25, 22, the 20 and 33 intersections, the High Street intersections at either end, 15 and 231, those are 5 there that the traffic engineers and Chuck Proctor made recommendations that would be good smart scale candidates. The 20 and 611 is one that we should figure out another solution for, because we've got left-hand turn lanes there, we've got signals, there's something else that we could do there. We could go back to them and plan for the future year.
What about, 20 and 621? Is that anywhere on the radar there?
Yes, sir. 20 and 621 is ranked the 93rd highest crash history in the district. So out of the 100, it's 93rd.
Okay, I was just curious if it was there because 611 is a bad intersection, but 621, I think if they, with traffic counts, they'd find a much higher volume there, coming off 621, because that is the cut through to Fredericksburg.
And
So
sure.
I was just curious, okay.
It sure is.
And a left turn coming south on 20 is at certain times of day, it's an interesting proposition.
It really is, and that's a location that I think would be a great spot for a center turn lane, 2 lefts in either direction. And I don't know how much right-of-way that we've got there, it wouldn't be a good smart scale project, but if it's something that we could use a little bit, even though it connects to 20, 621 and 611 are secondary routes. So creating a quick line item in your secondary 6-year plan and putting $30,000 on each of them, so where we can do studies to do preliminary design to determine what would be a good solution there, could be something that we do with this year's or next year's secondary 6-year plan. And then make a study, get information that we need, so that when the next round of smart scale comes, if we can identify a smart scale friendly, or friendly is not the right word, but one that would fit well for that versus one of the other revenue streams, then we could apply. And the traffic engineers are they constantly look at all of these, and if they come up with new ideas like the flashing yellow arrows or something, they're going to do that in the interim. And we may look at some sort of safety application for those 2 routes, since they're in our top 100. Anyway, regardless of the decision, like with the 3 and 20 intersection, they applied for those, they didn't ask me about it. They just said, that's a safety need, we're going to leverage and apply for this funds. And we're still trying to get the Fed's approval to spend it, but
So are you wanting us to identify from this list the candidates that we would like to go forward with smart scale? Is that something you're looking for from us
yes, sir.
right away?
Or if you have
Like
any
tonight?
questions- If you have any questions, we would need to jump pretty quickly. Again, our pre-submission deadline is in less than a month.
Well, it sounds like the 20 and 522, you're on track for that one, and so that's one that could proceed. What about the 33 and 20? Have you thought about that at all, Mark?
Oh, yeah.
But, well, no, I mean, in terms of.
No, I mean, Alan and I have talked about it, and he indicated he thought that would be a good candidate.
Are you far enough along with your developing that to?
We're not, but again, that standard of care varies. Orange County doesn't have a team of engineers sitting around, so our guys have jumped through their throat
We
to try
better
to get
not.
everything ready. Patrick will come in and help, and we'll do everything that we can to try to put an application, and since if we're targeting 4, we could even take those 2 intersections and wrap them into one project. And that would still give you 2 more applications for the 2 High Street intersections as well.
I'm sorry, give me your 33 and 20 and 33 and Governor Barber,
No, the
or what's the other one?
2033
There's
East and
2.
2033 West.
There's 2
Oh,
2033.
I see, yeah, okay, east and west, right, okay. Yeah, okay.
So we would recommend the 20 and 522. If we only have 4 applications, 2033 West, if we were gonna prioritize one, I would prioritize I don't wanna get this confused. I have
East,
some
you said, had
smart
worse injuries, but West had
The western
more of them.
intersection is listed in the top 100. The eastern intersection wasn't listed, but had 11 total crashes with 6 injury crashes, 9 total injuries. So based on the traffic engineers, they would either look at combining that or start with the eastern intersection first. Either combine the 2 as one project or select the eastern intersection and start with that. And a mini roundabout is a pretty cost-effective solution. We haven't really done one of those in the Culpeper district. I know we have in the southern half. Are you aware of any roundabouts with a mountable central island?
Not up in, like District Nine, maybe in Charleston.
So that's something that would have a low enough cost that would probably score well. So that one, and then the High Street projects, and Josh, do you wanna talk about those, because I wasn't there at that meeting, I'm sorry that I missed it.
I will try my best. Basically relaying information from Debbie Kendall, obviously the town manager there. Because they are a designated UDA, so they do meet the requirement for smart scale, but because they don't maintain their own roads, they have to use the county as a medium to make the application. They're ready to do that. They have, like Alan said, they had a study from 2013. I think the need is there, the design is pretty much there. It's just a matter of getting funding for it, but you all hold the purse strings, so to speak, on that one. And that could be split up into two projects. In fact, I think that's what we recommended, is that they're two separate projects, because they are exclusive of one another.
Well, if you move the telephone pole by the church, that would make life a hell of a lot easier on the one turn.
Yeah, you can make a turn.
Because if you're in a tractor trailer trying to do that, you either make people stop for you or you sit.
And they, the southern intersection, the one adjacent to Barbecue Exchange, is basically their preferred alternative is a roundabout there. Whether or not they keep, I think Stonewall Avenue is part of that, is a option. But they would prefer to see a roundabout there. The intersection you just mentioned, they have some flexibility with design. I think they would prefer a roundabout there as well, but they also have some alternative, basically right turn from High Street to 231 improvements that would get them not quite the same benefit that the roundabout would get, but still good turning movement benefit there too. In fact, I think we have a meeting coming up at the church regarding potential right-of-way donation or acquisition.
Yeah, I know there's some concern from members of the church about the right-of-way issue there.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's potentially four, so, assuming we haven't, there are others that were going to mention.
Well, those were the projects we would recommend. And if the board would like, we could at least go back and do some additional investigation, and prior, submitting on June the 1st is not the obligation. It's the August 1st deadline that we submit, then if the project's selected, it's gonna get funded. Yeah, thank you, Josh. So if there's very low risk in us. We've got a team dedicated to smart scale in our location design section now, and they're doing nothing but evaluating projects for submission. And if the board would like us to look at 4 for Orange, I would be more than happy to send those back.
What, sound like,
You guys are the ones that are impacted by it.
Yeah, I mean, if that's, Jim asked me, my opinion on the two in the town. I mean, I didn't realize that was something that was gonna come before us. I thought that was something that the town was in charge of, since it was in the town itself. If it meets the criteria, and you think that it is a significant crash history in both places, and that I'm not opposed to it. I think there's a lot of things that have to be worked out there, particularly at the end down by Gordon Barber. But I mean, I'm not opposed to running it through the process and seeing if it's approved, because, and if there are not other projects across the county that stand a better chance of being approved.
Well, that
30,
has a lot,
20 definitely needs to be done.
based on the studies that have been performed for those 2 streets in Gordonsville, they have a lot of information to work on to move forward. But we can at least look at them, update the cost estimates, look for what type of improvement type would be a good fit. And then before we submit in June, or once we look at it before we submit in July, you have the opportunity as the board to really think through, does this make good sense? And for the locality, for the town of Gordonsville, the governing board of the county still has to submit the application.
Okay, well,
That would be a
Yes, sir.
place to work.
One more question. The two intersections of 20 and 621, Mine Run Road and Pine Stake Road. They're another intersection that it would really be nice down the road to plan on aligning those two intersections. That way, both of them are safety concerns. Where would that fit within our processes to start thinking about something like that?
For those, based on the 5 criterion that Smart Scale is used, it doesn't have congestion, it doesn't have bike ped, it doesn't have all those things, but it does have safety.
Right.
So within the framework of safety, we could go back to the traffic engineers and see, is Smart Scale the right tool for this, or would we go HSIP revenue sharing?
And that's what I was asking. And as far as congestion, I've heard this complaint numerous times. The studies are done Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Orange County, with the exception of coming through the towns of Gordonsville and Orange, that's not our congestion time. Most of our congestion is on the weekends or evening rush hour.
That makes sense.
Is there any, and I know there's been some discussion of adjusting some of these studies so that we get a truer 7-day review on it. But I was just curious about those two, because I know that there is a lot of congestion there during certain times, and that you've got, once again, sort of like the 2033 intersections, you've got two intersections close to each other but far enough apart that they create two totally different hazards.
Well, how about this? Why don't we include those? I'll follow up with the programming folks, Chuck Proctor, and the traffic engineers, and we look at the 220 intersections, or the 4.
Right.
33, 33, 611, 621. We look at the 2 high streets, and we look at 20 and 522, and let them come back to us and say, okay, we would recommend this order if you were going to, or what would be the most appropriate revenue stream for these projects, and look at that.
sure,
Sounds good.
that's probably the right way forward, okay?
Okay, that's what we'll do.
Fantastic. Right.
A couple of minutes we have left, there's been a lot of interest in, as we've been discussing the 6-year plan. Your guys came to us, I think it was our last meeting, or within the last couple of meetings, and talked a little bit about the rural additions and the rural rustic improvements in the secondary plan. And there were several roads that are private roads that the communities that use those roads are interested in your rural addition programs. They're gonna do some engineering work on them. They finished several of them. There's a couple that they're still working on, but that's another conversation that there's interest has peaked, and so we need to follow through at some point and get back to the community. Oak Springs was one of those roads. Harbor Drive was another one. And you had a couple, I think, Jim, in your area. So
Yes, Enchanted Way and.
at some point, I need to better understand this rural addition program, because it sounds like there's so little money there that you'd have to, even if you decided to include one of these, you would have to do it, sort of 50 feet a year. For the next 50 years or something like that.
For General County, the rural addition funding is very limited. For Orange County, that's not the case. You already have $250,000 that are available for rural additions. Within your secondary 6-year plan, you have about $800,000 in Telefee funds that you could use for those as well.
Okay.
And in the draft plan, the secondary 6-year plan that we prepared for you, we've included Westwind Drive, Enchanted Way, Mountain View Court, those 3. And I had intended to, and I apologize, I had intended to have estimates for you for Oak Springs and Harbor today when I came, but I just couldn't make it work.
Yeah, well, that's fine. It's just, I don't want them to fall off of
They won't, we're gonna.
the table just yet.
Jonathan and I are gonna review them tomorrow.
Because apparently there's been some stirring around out there that has been observed by the community, and you know what that does.
Right.
That makes my phone ring.
Well, we'll follow the
Somebody thinks
same
we got money.
process
Yeah, that's right.
that we did for Independence. The extension of
Right,
Independence Road.
that's another one, same thing.
We'll review it, we'll generate an estimate, we'll at least go into GIS, we'll see how much right-of-way, if any, has been dedicated to public use, or at least to the county. And then from there, we would defer, see if it's encumbered by utilities, which they cannot be within the 40-foot framework that we have to work within.
Okay.
But then from there, if you've got enough right-of-way, and if the funds are there, and it's not encumbered by utilities, we will advance that work, if that's what you prioritize,
Yeah.
within the funds that we've got. Thankfully, we're in a good, we have funding in Orange County, where in the other counties that I administer, they do not. So that, you're right, it's $5,000 a year at that, and we'll never get done.
Well, we need to come to a decision on those, and there are several roads in play that, we need.
Well, we'll give you the estimates, we can look at the number of citizens that they would serve if you wanted some objective criteria, and you can look at the estimates and the return on investment for the amount of trips per day that you're going to improve, and let you step back and make a decision based on that. And that's something that you can argue against and defend as well.
All right, anything else for Alan?
No, the only other one, and of course not rural or anything, but, Partnership Way, which is down off Goodwin Drive, which is a private road. That was engineered to VDOT standards,
Okay.
and engineers on site as we built the thing, and that should go into the system.
Well, in some instances, if it's a road like that, that's already been built and it was just never brought into the system, we would do a quick inspection, we would identify any deficiencies, if any, and then look to get those rectified and then brought into
As
the
much
system.
money as I spent on that road there.
There better not be any, right?
Right,
No,
that's off of Goodwin.
that one was actually engineered out of a firm down in Fredericksburg.
Okay. Well, I'll certainly follow up on that one. I will.
Okay.
If that is it something that Anthony Hurlock had been working with you on before?
No, just, we had held it as a private road, but once we sold the property, I talked to Kenny about it, bringing it in, he was like, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it, but
Okay. We'll
since
certainly
we
look
have to
at
bring
and
it
see.
forward, it's one that ought to go in, because I don't know that y'all don't already push snow off of it anyway.
And it is in good shape currently, so, rather than letting it fall out of shape.
Might be a good way to get rid of the snow. You're scheduled to, give your quarterly update. You have about 4 or 5 minutes. Do you wanna do that now?
If it would please the board, I'll
I
do
mean,
it.
I don't know how much you wanna
You
go
want me
into.
to wait?
Some of these we've already talked about,
Right.
so, why don't you start?
Okay, I'll start real quick, and then I'll stay for the duration. If you have any more questions, I'll come back. Right, the first thing I did wanna, we've talked about the smart scale deadlines. Within the projects, we are continuing to work on Route 606 and 603 Indian Town Road. We hope to have both of those wrapped up within a few weeks. We're gonna let traffic ride on those projects all summer long to compact them. While we move on to the next project, Route 608 Meadow Road. At the end of the summer, we'll come back and hard surface all three of them. Route 601 isn't listed, but in your monthly report, that project will be introduced with the milestones once the funding becomes online in July. After 608, we do 608. We have funding on 602, and we're gonna try to begin the first 2 of 3 segments of 602 this season, once we figure out our resources. We may have to bring Greg Settlin over from the western part of the county, but we wanna get started on those this year. The resurfacing projects, so one thing I did note in your monthly report, the resurfacing projects are starting around our state, or around our county. If you go to VDOT's website, we have a nice interactive map that shows every single route that's gonna be resurfaced, what the resurfacing mechanism is, surface treatment, plant mix, and then the status of that. So if
What
we
is the
share that with
difference
you.
between those two?
Plant mix is a hot mix asphalt macadam where it's manufactured, and then we deliver it to the site and place it and compact it. The surface treatment is really a stick-built pavement structure that we build on site. It's a combination of layers of aggregate and liquid asphalt that's compacted and then sealed with asphalt and sand. Overall, over a course of time, the two meld into the same thing. The plant mix, we can place different material types and it carries a higher structure load. So if we have a roadway that has a high truck traffic, for example, the plant mix, hot mix asphalt is gonna hold up much longer and better. We're not gonna put surface treatment on 522. We may seal it with a slurry, or we're going to remove it and fill it with hot mix asphalt that we compact in place. And it has a stronger pavement structure that can handle higher weights.
Okay, thank you.
So that's up on the website. There were several completed studies, and Allison, we returned all the traffic engineering studies to you for the studies that we had in our queue. If you have any questions about those, please let me know or email them to me. Counting safety and operational improvements, we're advancing the work both on 20 and 522. You'll see the signal work should begin out there in 3 weeks. And then at 3 and 20, we've requested authorization from the Federal Highway Administration to begin delivering that project, which the scope of includes 2 offset left-hand turn lanes in each direction on 3 and 20. And we're gonna use different mechanisms. It's gonna take us a little longer to do the work, but we're gonna save a significant amount of money to do so. And then if local assistance, there's still 2 local assistance projects that I'm trying to get a better handle on in Gordonsville to get a feel for what's the status of those and how we can get them advanced further. And then our crews in Gordonsville and Roseville have done 556 work orders for you. So those guys just keep busy. In addition to their construction projects on the roads they're working on, they really jump through their throats.
It's obvious they've been out there working.
Well, gentlemen, that's all I had for you. Are there any questions I can answer?
Any other questions, sir? Oh, look at that. Tick, tick. All right, thanks for your time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
We learn a lot when you come visit with us.
Great.
Okay, call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have one change I'm aware of to the agenda. Item 4G needs to come off of the consent agenda. Those minutes are not ready, not in our package yet. Any other changes?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know whether this rise to a change, but I just briefly mentioned what's going on with the state's budget at the end of my report, so.
Okay.
Not have to formally amend the agenda, I just want to make you
Okay.
aware of that.
Let me not forget to give you that opportunity then, okay? Any other,
Motion to approve is modified.
okay, is there a second? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we have an agenda. Special presentations and appearances, service awards, Mr. David.
Yes, as you make your way, Mr. White,
Don't see anything down there, but.
Yeah, there's one.
Is there? Oh, okay. Well,
It snuck in when you weren't looking.
we have one service award tonight. Would like to recognize Laverne Twyman, 5-year service award. She's a self-sufficiency supervisor with our Department of Social Services.
come on down. They're gonna photograph us. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Okay, business spotlight. And tonight we have Jack Moss, co-owner of Buffton and Moss PLC.
Chairman White, members of the board, good evening. My name is Jack Moss, and I'm a partner from Buffton and Moss. My partner and wife, Lynn Buffton, is here with us tonight as well.
Thank you.
Now, I can't see mine on my screen, so I'll just have to look over there. All right, so we basically have an office in the town of Gordonsville. It's back in a small house behind BB&T and the visitor center and the railroad tracks. And so we have been there since we've been there since January of 2018. We actually started our company in 2017. Between Lynn and myself, we practiced law in the Commonwealth of Virginia for over 72 years. Right. Before Buffton and Moss, Lynn was a senior assistant attorney general for the Commonwealth of Virginia. She primarily worked with the Division of Child Support Enforcement, collecting money from parents who hadn't paid for their children. Before that, she worked in another capacity for the Attorney General's office as well as for the City Attorney's office in Richmond, and she had a private practice in the town of Scottsville. Myself, before we joined this partner, made this partnership, had a solo law practice in Louisa for 30 years, primarily focused there on criminal defense law. I also did serve as a town attorney for the town of Mineral for 12 years during that 30-year period. In 2015, I was made president of the Virginia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Our weekly lawyers publication is a Lawyers Weekly. I was in the Leaders of the Law class of 2015. There were 30 of us in that group, including the judge who presided over the Bob McDonald trial. Prior to that, I served for about 7 years in Air Force JAG and was an attorney advisor in the Department of the Treasury. So the practice areas, Lynn primarily does family law, does guardian ad litem work. As a matter of fact, this afternoon she was in juvenile court here in Orange, and she also does elder law. I tend to do criminal defense, general, personal, and business legal matters. What do we do in our spare time? Lynn is also the owner of Dog in the Woods, LLC, which is a SWAM certified company. We do high visibility dog products and the website. I'm also a professional musician and historic parade dance master. I learned that from Judge Hartgrader, who was circuit judge in Louisa when I started there in 1986. And he's very big into the colonial dancing, and I picked that up and do that as well. And so that's who we are. We're a small boutique firm, have a lot of experience, a lot to offer the county, so we're glad to be here in the business community. Any questions? Thank you.
All right,
Thank you, thank you, and welcome, yes.
Yeah, welcome.
Okay. Introduction of the Rappahannock Rapidan Community Services Executive Director. And let's see, come on up.
That's a funny one, yeah, I know. Anyway, I'm here today very proudly. As you know, Brian Duncan retired.
Right.
Well, I'd like to present to you our new CEO, Mr. Jim McGrath.
Nice to meet y'all. Thank you for having me.
Now, I'll sit down, and let him talk.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Jim McGrath. I'm relocating down to this area from the central Pennsylvania area where I've lived for about the last 11 years, running services to support people with intellectual developmental disabilities, behavioral health disabilities, some children's services as well. And I don't have a lot to say, I guess. I don't want to take up a lot of your time this evening. I'm just glad to meet everyone here. If there's anything that the Community Service Board can do for you, please reach out to me. I'm very interested in making sure that we are viewed as a resource for you to achieve the goals, support the people that live in your areas in the best way that we possibly can.
Okay. All right, look forward to working with you. Thank you.
I'm glad to be here. I have to say, someone said this to me the other day, and I'm gonna steal it from them. You know, I didn't know a lot about this area before I was contacted about this position, but as soon as I found out about the area, I got here as quick as I could, because it's a beautiful place, so I'm thrilled to be here. So,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, welcome.
thank you.
All right. Item D,
Thank you, gentlemen.
thank you for coming. Item 3D, we did already. Okay, consent agenda.
Motion to approve. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
No new business, no old business. Department Director, Constitutional Officer Report. And we're going to pick up where we left off with Mr. Gear. Last time we bumped you, so you get an extra minute tonight. That's payback.
Yeah, there you go. I'm pretty efficient, so it'll go pretty quick.
Yeah. Next time.
We'll get it later.
That's right.
All right, members of the board, thank you for letting me come in and talk about what we've been up to for the first quarter of 2018. That seems like a long time ago, so bear with me on some of the aspects of it here. So I think you've got the report that we sent in front of you, is that true? Okay. So I'm just gonna kind of walk through it and add a little bit to it, and if you want me to elaborate on anything, just kind of stop me and ask questions. The First section is a 3-year unemployment comparison. No surprise that the unemployment rate continues to trend down. That's in line with the state and national average. So again, no big surprises there. The next section is some stats on the Orange Workforce Center and the traffic that they're having there. Traffic is down, but that's to be expected with the unemployment rate being fairly low. And so that, since there's not as many job seekers, that brings a different issue, and that's on our businesses who are having difficulty filling vacant job openings. And so tried to figure out how to solve that problem, and we worked with Marty Baldwin, who runs the center. We've actually got him, if there's a particular person that they're interested in or seems particularly impressive, has a skill set that is unique, I've asked him to give me the resumes of those folks. And at the same time, we're in contact with a lot of the businesses, so we know what difficulties they're having and which positions they're having a hard time filling. And so we're hoping that we can just kind of act as something of a recruiter. So we know what the high performers are, and we know where the issues are, we can kind of marry those up.
Can you characterize what you're hearing from our businesses and what their issues are and what their needs are? I mean, how would you describe that in a summary fashion?
So it's really kind of volume of the frontline workers, so the actual manufacturers, people that are down on the floor, putting the parts together, running the machines, whatever it may be. That's where the biggest issue is. And it's a wide range of why. One of the biggest issues is people don't show up to work, and I'm having a hard time figuring out what the problem is there. Another one that I'm hearing a lot is the inability to pass a drug test.
Yeah.
And so that's, does that ring home with you?
Oh, yeah.
So
I've
it's,
had several.
You know, these are issues that seem, as adults, that we should be able to not have an issue with this, but it is. So we're trying to figure out how to work on that. And actually, last week, this won't be this will be not this quarter, but we went around with a state official and met with several businesses, and that's what they expressed, that people are failing drug tests because of marijuana. And so she's actually going to go to the state and try to figure out, is there a reason why? And a lot of the times it's because of the workers' comp insurance, like it's required from them to drug test. And whether or not you think it's an issue, you have to pay your insurance people, and so you have to follow the rules. And so that's, it's one of those things that's, it's a tough nut to crack, so that's.
What about the skill levels that are out there?
It's mostly the frontline workers, so it's not even a matter of skill. It's
Okay.
a lot of the time they just want them there. They can teach them what they need to know.
Okay.
There are some of the middle skill jobs that require certification, such as welding, things, CNC machinists, things like that, which with the new Pathways Tech program coming in, we're hoping that'll help with that issue. But again, if you can't show up to work and pass a drug test, I mean, that's.
What are you seeing with that? Lee and I are involved in the nursing home, have been for a long time, and I've always been amazed that people show up and they're surprised that they fail a drug test. They're first of all surprised that they have to take one, and then they're surprised that they fail it. And I scratch my head, how can that be? I mean,
Yeah.
Is that what you're seeing? Are people that are failing the drug test, are they surprised that they need to pass a drug test? Is it just that lack of awareness?
I don't know how it could be, because when
Well, I don't either, but
when most of the businesses offer an application, it says at the bottom, you will be subject to a drug test. And actually, one of our businesses, if a person fails a drug test, they will give them 30 days to come back and take it again. And if they pass it on the second try, then they'll consider hiring them. And they've had one person that was able to quit for 30 days and come back and
Low
pass the
success
test.
rate with that, right?
Yeah, so it's just, it's just a mindset thing. I don't have a good answer. I don't know. But it shouldn't be awareness, because it's literally on the application that they're filling out.
I would wonder if it would be useful just in some form to say, hey, in Virginia, if you're gonna work, we have to follow the workman's comp rules, and we're requiring a drug test. I mean, that just, maybe
It's not gonna make any difference.
No, not really.
And I don't have any data on what
I
age
won't
group
get high
it is,
tomorrow and
but,
I'll go
you know, I
apply.
imagine it's the
Exactly,
younger.
that's, and in getting that 30 days, that means that they can go back and get high until the 29th day, and then they'll go back and take the test again. That is the mindset that they have.
So you're saying you can't fix stupid?
Yeah.
That's probably,
There's some level to that, yeah.
well, we've heard these discussions from employees for several years, and so it's,
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
but it's a little odd. It sounds like it's not just the number of, the pool. There is a pool there. It's just,
Unacceptable.
yeah, they've decided not to,
Well, under Keynesian economics, 4% unemployment is full employment.
when I was in
And
grad
we're at
school, it was
3.
6.
So, yeah.
They used to say 6%, so, full employment.
Yeah, so the pool is small, and so the ones that are available can't pass the drug test. Well, not all of them, obviously, but
So
It sounds
4%
like
of
a
the
lot.
people can't crack, I mean, that's really what we're looking at then?
Right, we
Yeah.
already have people in the workforce that don't wanna be in the workforce, so.
Yeah, there's that
We,
too.
we had one that sent in a resume, and we called her for an interview, and she's like, what do you do? Who are you? I can't possibly do that. It's like, why did you send a resume?
Yep.
yeah, I don't know. It's,
To get to meet, so she could meet her unemployment,
Exactly.
yeah, to say she applied for a job. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that going around too. There's always gonna be folks that work the system, but, right. So next, we have, prospect activity. In the first quarter, we had, 7 requests for information, and that was from 5 manufacturers, 1 transportation logistics company, and 1 trade services company. And those led to 4 site visits, so we were able to show off, some of our, mostly buildings. A lot of folks are looking for existing buildings rather than green spaces, but, so we had 4 site visits. We currently have 24 active prospects, representing 9 different industries. And in the last couple of reports, I think I mentioned that we're trying to clean up our, prospect tracking tool that we use, which is an Excel spreadsheet to kind of really figure out which ones are real, which ones are really interested in Orange. I think we're in a good place now, so I'm confident in saying that we really do have 24 prospects interested in Orange. The website analytics compared to this time last year, we are about 60% higher in traffic to the website. 91% of those are new users, so I think that's a testament to our outreach via social media. We've got business cards with our websites on it. Everything we send out has our websites. We're driving a lot of traffic there. We get almost on a daily basis compliments on the layout and content on our website, so we're gonna continue to push people there because it's a really good tool for us, and it represents Orange County well. And then
what's the bounce rate?
Bounce rate is when someone comes in and then immediately leaves. So they don't click on anything else, go to another page.
Okay.
They just come, they go to our main website, not interested in what they're seeing. And then they
So that doesn't count as a visit?
It does. So your bounce is like, so the visit, yeah, so we have about 1,500 visitors, and then, well, yeah, that doesn't look too good, does it?
70% of them don't like
move
what they
on.
see, or at least they leave.
Or they find what they want and go away. So, I mean, there's a way to, on the main page.
The glass can be half full. You're right.
So the first page has a lot of stuff.
He's
on it.
earning that extra minute. You see that? I can see what's
I'm
going on.
trying here. But if you do go to our website and you scroll down, there's a lot of information on that first page. So there is a lot of opportunity for you to not actually click and go to another page. But
So
Yeah,
that
good
1
catch
minute
there.
and 20 seconds includes the people that are in the bounce rate?
that's just total average length of the session. So how long you're on the website is
Okay.
so about 1 minute and 20 seconds there.
Okay.
All right, the next section is other activities, so it's just a long list of bulleted activities. I'm not gonna touch on all of those, but I did wanna highlight a few. In regards to site readiness, the King Site, master plan, which is going on in the Locust Grove area. Draper Aiden's working on that. A reminder, that's funded by the Virginia Business Ready Sites program. and that's to take the site from a tier level 1, which basically means there's nothing there, to a tier level 3. And that's 3 out of 5, and 5 is pretty much ready to go. A business can come in, build a building, and get to work. So once that's finished, so they've completed to date the phase 1 environmental assessment, the geophysical due diligence, geotechnical soil borings, and they're currently working on the endangered species review and the wetlands delineation. And when they finish those, they're gonna give us a master plan with recommended building layouts and some costs associated with those. And so with all of that packaged together, we get the tier 3 designation there. In the Lee Industrial Park, we finished some rail feasibility studies, so we now have a pretty good idea of what it will take to get a rail spur onto 2 of our available sites in there. So we'll use that to market some rail users and also potentially benefit some of our current businesses who are struggling with truck transportation. And we continue to work with other localities on some Go Virginia projects that are aimed at site development. From a marketing standpoint, we developed a new rack card, which actually Rose and I think Allison
Yeah, I
may have
think
helped
they already-
put an eye on this. You already saw these?
Actually, that's pretty good. There's a lot of information on that card.
Yeah, it's got a lot of good stuff, and it looks good, and we've been handing those out all over the place. Another marketing tool that we got, we went after what's called a federal opportunity zone. And so 25% of the eligible census tracts in Virginia could be recommended for one of these zones. And so we submitted 2 in Orange, one of them, Town of Orange, the census tract that includes the Town of Orange, and the census tract that includes the GWAP plan. And what a federal opportunity zone is, it allows investors who have unrealized capital gains, so they can take those gains and move them into what's known as an opportunity fund. And when they move them out of there, there's no capital gains tax on it. So now you've got a pool of money that can be used to invest in only these opportunity zones. And so I'm happy to happy to report that we found out a couple weeks ago that the census tract with the Town of Orange was actually selected as one of those 25%. So the governor has recommended that to the Department of Treasury. We should know within a month whether or not it's official, but it's expected that anything that the governors, so each governor around the nation was able to recommend, it's expected that whatever they recommend gets pushed right through. So that'll be another tool that we can use. And then we've done some professional development and networking things with VEDP and Port of Virginia. I won't go into too much detail there. We went to the General Assembly and talked to them about budgeting for incentives and site development programs in Go Virginia, which I understand they haven't haven't figured out what they're doing with the budget yet.
We have no budget
We
yet.
don't know what we're doing. So if I caused any confusion up there, I'm sorry about that.
No, I don't think you.
I don't think you were the problem.
You don't, I think they can do that on their own.
And also, in the first quarter, we put a lot of focus on the agriculture industry, just kind of learning about the trends there and seeing how we can keep Orange County successful in that area by attending a few seminars. And just trying to move along. At the end of the report, we've got a few pictures there. This one is a ribbon cutting on top of green applications. Then Governor Terry McAuliffe came and unveiled their rooftop solar array, which is the largest in Virginia. It's a picture of Hornets for Hire job fair, which was meant for high school students who are going to enter the workforce right out of high school or wanted a summer job or internship. This was a way to let them know what jobs are right here in Orange County. They don't have to go anywhere else. Next is a picture of the Port of Virginia, which we took a field trip up there. Actually, Mr. Crozier joined me on that and kind of learned about that operation and build the relationship with them, so hopefully they can help us with our rail aspirations at the Lee Industrial Park. And the last one is a picture of Ambassador Henny Schuer when he came and visited Orange County. I think you've heard plenty about that. But, happy to take any questions if you have any.
Any other questions for Phil? All right. Thank you.
Phil.
Thanks. Thanks, Phil.
Break the hand on that one.
County Attorney report?
No report, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. County Administrator, Mr. David.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I have 2 items and then maybe a half an item on the budget. The Germanna Wilderness Area Plan, as you all know, we're in a mode now where there are a number of projects, work program matters that have been completed. Some of the larger ones are coming near to their end. And on April 25th, we received the final draft of the water and wastewater master plan from Draper Aid and Wiley Wilson. If you recall, the arc of this document was to start looking at, and this was 2015, I think is when we started. I mean, it was a while ago. At looking at the Germanna Wilderness Area, each one of the sub-areas, and then looking at future land use, future development pattern, and then building from there what water and wastewater needs would be demanded by that development patterns, and then where the water's coming from, and then how do we treat that water and discharge it, given the current state and future state, what the future has for environmental regulations. And that document's complete. There are only really two items that are left in that, and one has to do, obviously, with two of the major things: financing. How is this financed? And two, the governance. Because RSA is a provider, the incumbent provider in the area, this is new distribution lines, transmission lines, water withdrawal, using existing permits and things. Those two items were left, not for the steering committee, but for you all at the Board of Supervisors level, because you all will be the decision makers in regard to that, as well as the entire Germanna the utilities plan. So what we're going to do is impanel a series of work sessions for you all. Because this is dealing with my work product, we're not in a state for public disclosure of these. They have a lot of sensitive information, particularly with property and with county investment. So we'll do some closed work sessions, maybe on alternating Tuesdays, and bring you all together and start walking you through this. Mr. Hildebrand's been the one overseeing this whole project. So I think at the end of the day, I'm very pleased with where we ended up. I turn to the three board members to kind of chime in on where, is that fair representation of where we are?
I think so.
Yeah.
It just seems, this is still moving at light speed for government work, but it doesn't always feel that way.
I mean, just look at the highways.
Yeah.
So we're moving along, like you said, light speed. It does get frustrating sometimes though, so, but I'd say we're on course, or actually ahead in some regards.
Good. The other thing is an opportunity that presented itself from the Greater Piedmont Realtors Group through their governmental affairs consultant, Susan Gaston. They provide, through the National Home Realtors Association, funding to do housing studies. And they've done housing studies in Culpeper, one in Fauquier, and they have agreed to apply, and these are pretty much available if the association asks, from the National Association of Realtors, to do a housing stock assessment and future housing needs report for the GWAP area. We should be able to kind of dial this in, given that most of one census tract included in the GWAP area, to really inform the steering committee and ultimately board, planning commission, economic development, kind of where we've been with housing, where we are, and what the future has, as overlaid against national and state trends. And so I think this was an added benefit of somebody presenting themselves with some dollars to fund a study, but I think it's going to be real value added to the process. Don't have a time start of when we start on that. When we finish, I don't think this thing's going to take too long once we get going. The funding's not, it's $5,000, so it's not like we're going to get a great deal of information, but I think it's certainly more than what we have now. The only other things that are left on the Germanna Wilderness Area Plan is that we have in process the Corridor Access Management Plan, and going to work through on how to have the final draft reviewed by board members. Then once that's done, it goes to a public input, or public community town hall. I think that's what we've been called. Thank you, Allison. At Locust Grove, that's to be the schedule, probably be sometime this summer. And then the Planning Commission has tentatively scheduled a public hearing for the Route 3 Corridor Overlay District, which are the design standards that apply to the Route 3, as well as the Germanna Wilderness Area Plan Overlay District. Josh and I have talked about the notice. We're going through a public hearing process, and I've talked to the county attorney. In fact, the county attorney and I had a real good conversation this afternoon. I think we've worked through a process that will allow legal notification to be done, but probably won't involve individual notices to all the property owners. I think there's a way through, but we've got to still think through that. So we may ask the Planning Commission to drop that date and maybe do it at first meeting in July. That way it gives us some time to kind of craft this ad the way it needs to be. I think at the end of the day, we're going to still get to the same point that you all wanted to get to. Is that, Tom, a fair representation? And I think it still meets the timeline that there's some landowners out there that are certainly very interested in us getting this on the books so that they might be able to take advantage of it or market their properties as available for that type of special zoning. I'm thinking if there was anything else to do.
What do you think on the time frame for the corridor access plan?
I'm going to get you all together here fairly quickly with a webinar with the consultant. Probably reconvene the committee or have the town hall. We won't go back to the committee with the plan. Maybe June, I guess. And probably it's all in mind about timing and scheduling. But I needed you all as a group to see this before it goes to me, so you can get informed. But I'm thinking of June timeframe for the town hall.
Okay.
All right, that's all I had on that. One other footnote on the steering committee. I think we're going to be back into a bit of a maintenance mode as some of these projects have wound down. May do a reconvening of the steering committee periodically to kind of check the status of things going on. But I certainly want to recognize the board, the steering committee members, the Economic Development Planning Commission. For the last 6 years, I think it was, when we had a presentation to the Realtors Group when they were here. There's a lot of things have been covered for government, for local government, in mere 6 years.
Well, it started on May 9th, 2013, and tomorrow will be May 9th, 2018, so,
5 years.
Even faster.
yeah. We're better than we thought we were.
That's right.
That's something.
A lot's been accomplished in that time. though.
Yeah, it really has. I mean, you think about it, it's,
Haven't moved any earth yet.
not yet.
Which, it's interesting how things are starting to line. I had a meeting with Dr. Gullickson and Dr. Davis, her operations VP with Germanna, talking about the new building and things. And the way they're lining up the programming of that of being a healthcare campus with what our aspirations are for this, of attracting business investment. I mean, we're absolutely in sync, absolutely in sync. Next item I had, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, is just a brief report out on your retreat that we held a couple weekends ago on April 21st. I think, at least my take from you all's discussions during the course of the day, was that the priorities are still continue to be the priorities for the next biennium, the next 2 fiscal cycles. And it really is a stay the course that we're doing what you all expect the staff to be doing, what work you as a board are to be doing. There was one change that you made, and I think it certainly is very appropriate. We had these kind of in 1 through 6 order, but the board felt pretty strongly that these are priorities under each one of these 2 topics: vibrant economic development and effective or reflective government. So I've so ordered those. The only other thing that I'll add, at least, and certainly board members can provide their own comments on this, I think you all agreed that maybe the next area that you all as a board, and certainly the county organization, is that high-quality citizen services are very, very important to our mission, fulfilling our mission. and that this is everyone, whether those citizen services are delivered by a department that provides support to county functions, or those front-facing operations like fire, EMS, parks and rec, planning and zoning, and that I will, and you all gave me the charge to start bringing forward in the near future conceptual strategies for these various functions, to start looking at citizen service, high quality, with available resources. I have to underscore that, because we need to be able to work within in our budgets and within our resources, but the idea that citizen services are something important.
To include the digital citizen.
To include the digital citizen, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And any questions or, yeah? All right, good. The last thing,
You had a motion on there.
oh, thank you, Allison. I would like for you to all adopt these priorities. You didn't do it last time. I think this time memorializing this way is certainly an appropriate statement.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Good. Thank you. The next item is just brief. The Senate is coming back next Tuesday. They'll take up the House version of the budget that was adopted. I did get peeled back some of the veil. The House has a 2% raise for instructional staff, teachers. The Senate does not. And so whether there's additional funding, don't know. There may be revisiting by the Senate of this hold harmless money that when composite indexes have changed and gone up, and orange, I think tentatively was in the $800,000 for the first year of the biennium. That may be taken up as part of this process, but there's becoming quite a bit of pressure put on by VACO and VML and all the member localities with the legislature. I know Mr. Chairman talked to one of our legislators at the chamber dinner about the need for them to get on about their business and adopt a budget and leave us alone and let us go on and do our work. What happens on Tuesday or soon thereafter, don't know. We have a plan in case things go. I was talking to a former delegate just this morning, Ed Scott. I was at a meeting with him, and he doesn't think it's going to go that far, but I said, just say never, but he was pretty disgusted, frankly, that this is now becoming a routine occurrence. So no news to report. Dr. Tanner and I certainly remain in communication, but you all will know as soon as we know. The only other thing, this was the last point I want to make. If it's apparent that we need to move fairly quick in appropriating money, and we've got to go through a discussion if there's additional dollars, or in the converse, if there's less dollars than what we had budgeted, then the budget committee is going to come together fairly quickly, and then we may need to bring you, not maybe necessarily in a regular meeting. So I just kind of keep the ad hoc nature of this going.
Jim and I will keep our helicopters warmed up.
Yeah, that's right. And other tools of engagement. Okay, board comment. Anybody? I actually have one, two items, if I might. Like to congratulate the school board. They did a search for a new superintendent, had a lot of interest apparently, and have made a selection, as you have seen announced, and from what I am told, the school board are very excited about the individual that they've selected, someone who has a lot of experience and a lot of energy and has some good ideas, and so I think it reflects well on the county, frankly, that they were able to have the level of interest that they did, and it appears that selected someone who's eminently qualified and excited. One other quick item, I'd like to congratulate those involved in tourism. I don't see anybody in the audience tonight, but as you know, they prepared a new video sort of encapsulating the tourist attractions that we have in the county, and it has been well received from everything that I can see. It was a collaborative effort between businesses and the county, and businesses in the county and the county, and they held a sort of an unveiling, I guess you would say, was it last Wednesday out at Montpelier, which was very well attended, and So a lot of work went into that, and I think the product reflects it. Congratulations to them. Any other comment? Okay, information items, any questions? Appointments to boards and commissions.
I would like to nominate Randy Soderquist for another term on the Piedmont Workforce Network Board.
Any others? All in favor of that nomination, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Calendar, we have a public hearing to schedule on June 12th. Okay. Meet with everyone's. Is that the only public hearing for that night, or do we have any others?
I believe that, no,
That's the
there are
only one?
none currently scheduled. If you
Okay.
schedule this, it would be the only one for that
Okay.
evening.
Okay. All right.
Ready?
Yep.
Whereas the Board of Supervisors of Orange County desires to discuss in closed meeting the following: discussion and consideration of performance and assignment of specific public employees of the public body, discussion and consideration of the disposition of publicly held real property in the Rhodesville area as well as in the town of Orange, where such discussion in open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, consultation with legal counsel pertaining to actual litigation with Orange Volunteer Rescue, where such consultation or open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body, consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters concerning county boundary issues, legal requirements for amending certain zoning districts, and potential liability for allegations made against the county requiring provision of legal advice by such counsel, and discussion of the award of a public contract for a radio system involving the expenditure of public funds, discussion of which in open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body. And whereas pursuant to sections 2.2, 3711A1, A3, A7, A8, and A29 of the Code of Virginia, such discussions may occur in closed meeting. Now therefore be resolved that the Board of Supervisors of Orange County does hereby authorize discussion of four stated matters in closed meeting. Need that as a motion.
So moved.
Seconded. Okay, we're in close. All in favor? Lee? Yeah.
It's getting longer and longer.
Yeah, I know. Well, we're getting it.
Members of the board, to the best of your knowledge, were the only matters discussed in the closed meeting, public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements, and that only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting. Mr. Crozier?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Frame?
Aye.
Mr. White?
Aye.
And Mr. Goodwin?
Aye.
Okay. Public comment. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
No, sir, not for public comment.
Okay. We have 4 public hearings tonight. Public hearing number 1, proposed amendment to the comp plan. Do we have a lead spokesman on that to start with? Okay, Thomas?
Well, good evening to the board. Tonight I will be giving a brief presentation on CPA 18-01. This is a proposed amendment to the public facilities portion of the comprehensive plan. As you will recall, this was a work session item back in January. Virginia State Code requires for the general character, location, and extent of all planned public facilities to be included within the locality's comprehensive plan, and we currently do not have that. So planning staff thought it would be wise to include that within the comprehensive plan, given the planned facilities we have in the future. We took the comments you gave us at the work session in January in stride and revised the comp plan accordingly. In addition to that, the only change we had was we did a minor formatting change to the table, and that we put the title of each section within the table in a row. So the content didn't change, it's just the way it's displayed within the table. The Planning Commission held their public hearing on this proposal during their April 5th regular meeting. There were no speakers from the public during that hearing, and the Planning Commission did recommend unanimous approval as presented, and that is planning staff's recommendation as well. So with that, I will turn it over to you all for questions.
One question I had, in looking at the matrix you have in here, as indicated, we reevaluate the CIP, the Capital Improvements Plan, on an annual basis. As we add and/or delete items from the CIP, do we need to, in some timely fashion, amend the comp plan every time we're making a CIP change? The one concern I have is the way this is presented now at this level of detail, which also shows in the CIP. It's not a disclosure question, it's also in the CIP. But having it here, I'm trying to understand if that creates an obligation, or maybe this is a question for the county attorney, or a need to have these two documents tracked, in some real-time kind of a standard.
It's not necessary that they track. The reason as you know, the comp plan is not binding except in one little narrow area, and that is public facilities.
Right.
If you don't have a public facility listed in your comp plan, then you have to go, the planning commission has to go through a process to verify that it's in substantial compliance with the comp plan, the public facility. Reason for that is, if you think about the logic of it, we're not subject to our own zoning ordinance. So basically what the General Assembly has said is, but we will create a public forum where the public can come comment on public facilities, because at some point you either got to put them in your comp plan or do a substantial compliance analysis. But there's no state code requirement that our CIP track with our comp plan, and there's no state code requirement even that these things be in here. I think we had the issue of the public safety building, and I think staff was just being proactive and saying, let's go ahead and put some other things in here so that we don't have to go back and deal with a substantial compliance issue down the road.
Well, there's a sentence that says, as new projects are identified, parenthetically, particularly if designated in the CIP, they should be included in this matrix as the need arises. And I was just trying to get an interpretation of what we're committing to there, what we mean, and how often. I mean, I don't think we want to do comp plan modifications as part of our annual budgeting process. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
But notice the as the need arises language.
Yeah, I know, but, okay, I'm trying to define that a little bit.
And again, I think the need arises more when you're getting ready to do a project, and, it needs to be in here, or you're gonna have to go through the whole substantial compliance process.
Yeah, the intent was sort of to have a place in the comprehensive plan where we could put future projects. I don't think it's necessarily requiring that to happen, but it's, as Tom was saying, it's a place for that to go, that's organized.
Maybe this doesn't meet the intent of the state code, but could we not reference such a matrix in the comp plan from the CIP? We reference a matrix that would exist that does exist in the CIP into the comp plan by reference, as opposed to actually inserting it. And that way, when it changes, it's sort of an automatic.
Well, the only thing is the CIP, the comp plan not only has to list the project, but it has to list the location of the project. So, unless we change, if we modify what our CIP looks like, that it includes not only the project, but the specific location. What the comp plan part of it is location as much as it is anything. It's identifying location for a particular public facility.
Which we could do for public facilities.
A discussion that's being held by the planning commission is a lot of the maps and other reference materials. They were discussing not necessarily including it in the comp plan itself, but referencing it due to the fact that everything is now available online. And maybe, is that something we could do, is reference
Yeah.
public facilities,
I would tell you, if the language is not in the actual comp plan, I would not feel comfortable building the building without doing a.
But if we're saying, okay, I wanna, add, put another, building at the public schools on an existing location, it seems to me that this covers that.
Well, existing locations that have public facilities are probably not a problem. Adding
Understand.
another public
But
facility
if I was
to the
going to build a
location
new
has-
school in an entirely different location, that would require a comp plan change, as the public safety facility has required here.
Right, because it's on the new parcel of land that we didn't even own. And
But
so
at this time here, we say that it's a governmental administrative complex. So at some point, in addition to the public safety building, I want to build an administrative building. I could do that, the comp plan already covers that.
Right, with the proactive approach that's been
So
taken.
I'm not sure that this is a problem, because you need to do something fairly substantial, like a new school in a different location, that would require a comp plan change.
But there's some minor things in here. Adaptive reuse of the historic courthouse.
Let me,
You know, that doesn't go out and involve acquiring property or doing anything that's, as I understand what's planned there, that won't even be visible unless you go inside. So that's part of what caught my attention. It's sort of a mixed bag of things. There are big projects, like you mentioned, but then there are others that are,
let me, ask the county attorney, I think one of the things is we have a timing issue between these documents. The CIP is not a legal document, except unless you're doing cash proffers or something, some other zoning action that's tied to capital expenditures. Comp plan is about location. And so one of the things is that we update the CIP every year. It's actually, we do a 5-year plus a 10-year, actually a 10-year capital improvements. Some of the things in the out year are aspirational, but and they're big dollars. But the comp plan by code requires a 5-year look-see, what's
Right.
changed. And things could have changed in that 5 years. And you're not necessarily needing to update your comp plan every time something changes in the comp plan.
Correct. What the state law says is you have to look at it to decide whether you need to update it. So minor adjustments, minor modifications, you don't have to
Have to
amend your
do
comp
that,
plan.
but so if our CIP is kind of this living document that's an annual thing, some of these big projects that are tied to a location, those just don't drop out of the sky. I mean, there's a whole deliberate process that you have to go through, not only from the need, the level of service, location, so that you really are aligning the comp plan with the CIP as it's transpired from the time that the first amendment of the comp plan to the 5-year time, and so you're not having to adjust it every time you do something with the CIP. Is that making sense?
Yeah, I agree, and to Mr. White's concern, yeah, I mean, the adaptive reuse probably doesn't really need to be on here.
that's right.
Because,
That was my thought when I saw it.
but there's no harm in it.
Yeah, I'm not pushing to take it off. It's just
I mean,
an example of the point I was trying to make.
Anytime we're gonna be taking on a big project in the CIP, it's probably gonna be in the time frame that's within the comp plan update criteria.
I would say that that's a reasonable assumption. I would also say that this comp plan is being amended for a CIP when the county really hasn't had what I would characterize as a formal CIP, capital improvements programming process. We now have that. It's working. It's doing itself well. So now this is kind of our first cut at it. I think the next time we look at this in 5 years, we'll have a better feel of what's rising or falling to be amended.
It solves our immediate problem of the public safety building,
And it solves some other
potentially
potential
solve
problems
some,
in the future, too.
potentially solve some other problems, and it doesn't hurt for any of the language to be in there.
If we wanted to build another couple of hangars, that'd be covered here.
Yes, sir. And they may be driven by airport user demand within the 5-year timeframe, or maybe not.
All right, any other items for Thomas while he's here? Okay.
Thank you.
Open the public hearing. Do we have anyone signed up for this?
No, sir.
Close the public hearing. Okay, gentlemen.
Move
what's
to
your-
approve?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Let's see, we need a roll call here.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Crozier?
Excuse me, aye.
Mr. White?
Aye.
Mr. Goodwin?
Aye.
And Mr. Frame?
Aye.
Okay,
5-0.
passes unanimously. Okay, public hearing number 2, proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance 1803, dealing with temporary housing. Mr. Frederick.
So, gentlemen, this second public hearing amends section 70-623 of the zoning ordinance, which deals with temporary housing. Right now, there's 3 different types of temporary housing. One is emergency housing in the event of a natural disaster. You can see in your draft ordinance, that section's not being touched. The second category is essentially new use, or new use of temporary housing during new construction. That carries the bulk of the amendments here. The current ordinance basically says that you can use manufactured housing as temporary living quarters for people that are constructing conventional homes, as it's termed. This really just expands the options, says any type of housing you need to be provided as temporary can be used. We've added an affidavit requirement in here, just so the property owner is fully aware of what their obligations are. And for the sake of time, I'll stop there and entertain any questions.
Okay. Any questions?
I may have one in just a second. I'm trying to read this once again. Just under the temporary use, I'm just trying to decipher the temporary permit. Temporary zoning for temporary housing. What, I know of at least 3 recent, the temporary housing is not temporary housing, it's existing housing.
Right.
How can you issue a permit for temporary housing when it already has an occupancy permit as permanent housing?
Well, I'm second, I want to build another house on this property. And so I'm going to declare this, my existing house, as a temporary, and I'm agreeing to take it down after my other one gets a certificate of occupancy.
Well, that's the situation that spurred this. I think what Jim's saying is, you've got an existing house that you're already living in, so why would you have to get a temporary permit? I mean, it's.
Right.
The temporary permit is to create the documentation, otherwise, if we just allow, if Josh just says, yes, you can build 2 houses, now you got 2 houses on the property, which is what we don't allow. So what he's creating is a methodology here for making sure at the end of the process, there's only one. And so he's calling exactly what, Mr. Crozier said, it is actually a permanent house, but you're agreeing to convert it.
You're converting a permanent house into a temporary house, essentially is what you're saying.
Temporarily.
Until it's
Well, no.
permanently gone.
That's why it's temporary, because you're gonna knock it down after.
After he's got the other one built.
Well, and I had a question actually about the knocking it down part. Is it possible that we should consider cases where the house gets converted to the former residence gets converted to something else? I don't know what it could be, a barn, let me just say, as an example.
As
Or
opposed to being completely removed.
As opposed to being completely removed. I mean, I sort of pause to think about, are there situations where the property owner would seek to change the use from residence to some other use that would be permitted, as opposed to the only
Especially if it's
option
on
being destruction?
agricultural land.
Yeah,
But that's gonna affect all your setbacks and everything else, depending on where you put the new
Well,
thing. I think that should be left as a variance that they need to seek.
Well, the way this is written now,
He's gotta tear it down.
you have only the choice of removal. And that,
I'm not trying to get too far down, but what if the existing structure of, if we change the ordinance, 800 square feet or less, you're having to get a temporary building permit or a temporary permit, and you're going to have to tear down an accessory structure.
We do change of use for those situations, and that would be particularly more prevalent now, there's a lot more, I mean, my house, for example, is under 800 square feet, I could do that. It's a more prevalent, and we end up doing a change of use to convert that to an accessory dwelling, so they don't have to go through all the rigmarole that this would otherwise.
Okay, my only question is, and only because of things we've run into, where is that, where is that avenue?
Is there a way for someone, let's say they have 50 acres and they've got an existing house, they're gonna go on the hill over there, they're gonna build a new house, they're gonna live in this house until that house is built, then they wanna convert this into a barn. Is there a way that they can do that?
Technically, because of the definition of single-family dwelling, no. Because the ordinance defines that as, it's either intended, originally designed, or, I think, occupied as a dwelling. And the reason that they get hung up on that is because it was originally designed to be used as a single-family dwelling, so there's no
Well, you-
real way we could
So
convert
you
that.
couldn't say, or either completely destroyed or converted to a permitted accessory use.
what about a tenant house? Could it become a tenant house if it's on a farm?
And in fact, we've done a few of those, actually.
I just think the absolute requirement of destruction might not be the only option that we should consider. There would be a narrow set of other options, but
As they say, a permitted accessory use.
But remember, this is only applying in scenarios where it plays out that you need a temporary dwelling to build another dwelling. This doesn't play out across the board in all situations with multiple structures.
but the prevalent case is the one that Mark described, where
Sure.
I'm living in my house and I want to build a new house on that other hill, which is on the same parcel of land. I'd like to be able to do that.
And the issue currently now is that you can only do that with a manufactured home. Your temporary
No,
housing is
and we
can
need to
only be
fix that,
manufactured,
right.
which
And
is
we
what this
understand we're
does.
fixing
Right, right.
Well, I would suggest that I'm gonna support going ahead and adopting this, so we take care of problem A. I agree there's a problem B, which is you should be able to convert it to, it might be a structure that's perfectly good structure, it could be used for storage, it could be used for a chicken house, whatever, so, it may even be a historic structure, it may be a structure that's been there for 200 years. So, it might be an old log cabin, so why?
It could become vacant.
Why insist on knocking it down, So I would suggest we come back and revisit that. Because I
If
think
we
if
added-
we tinker with this, we're gonna have to run it back anyway,
Right.
Yeah, and
run it back through the process. I need
Yeah,
to speak in
yeah.
complete sentences.
no, absolutely, that makes sense.
Well, that addresses my concerns.
So we gotta throw in another public hearing process to fix the,
Well,
I'm just.
it's never ending.
Yeah.
I know, I'm just
There's a-
trying to, I'm
the
saying if
zoning
you added,
ordinances-
or converted to a permitted accessory use, would that, create a problem?
We'd have to change the definition for single-family dwelling. That's the kind of the root of the problem here. And for what it's worth,
Okay.
I can only think of 3 scenarios that we've run into in the 5 years I've been here, one of which was Mark's recent scenario. It's not something that comes up frequently, it's just trying to give more flexibility to property owners when they're
Understand.
trying to build new housing.
We're going to have to revisit the zoning ordinance anyway on a number of issues.
Yes.
so.
Right, that's true, okay, any other questions?
Remember
for
this one?
Josh? All right. Open the public hearing. Anyone signed up to speak, Alice?
No, sir.
Close the public hearing. Okay, gentlemen, any discussion or
Make a
motion?
motion to approve.
Okay, now any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Goodwin,
Aye.
Mr. White,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Frame,
Aye.
Mr. Crozier?
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. Okay, on to public hearing number 3.
That was the two simple ones.
Public hearing number 3, dealing with lighting matters. You got this one, Josh? Okay, go ahead.
As you all may recall, the board actually initiated this one. It establishes new exterior lighting standards for commercial development, townhome development, and apartment, because I know we get tons of apartments here, but as a proactive measure to cover apartments in the future. It's fairly typical in the way that it regulates lighting. It's mainly focusing on light pollution, light trespass on adjacent properties, and glare, which tend to be the 3 big things when it comes to regulating lighting. We've changed a slight requirement in the site plan just to make everything jive, for lack of a better term, internally with the ordinance.
Are you referring to the photometric?
Yeah, we have 2 levels of site plan, minor and major. We just knocked that down to the minor, just so that everything is shown properly.
Okay, I don't understand, why are we theoretically requiring a photometric for minor but not for major? That seems backwards to me.
The way we crafted this, there's technically 3 levels of site plan. We have administrative, which are sketch plans. When you're gonna build a house, you just draw it on plat. Minor is for under an acre of disturbance, and then major obviously is an acre or more, and they build on each other. So all the requirements for administrative site plans are also required for minor site plans, and all the requirements for minor site plans are also required for major. So each level you move up, you get all of the previous requirements.
It's cumulative.
Right, that's the better way of, I'm being.
So no, it's the major site plan incorporates everything that's under minor site plan.
Correct. The only thing I'll add, the ordinance that was given to us for, to give to the planning commission for their review stipulated a grandfathering clause. The date we pick, I think we went over this, but just to reiterate, the date that is in there coordinates to the parking ordinance, which you all adopted a couple of years ago. That date, October of 2015. Again, that stipulated lighting standards just strictly for parking areas. So in terms of consistency of parking regulations, the dates are the same. That's the rationale there. Just briefly touch on the planning commission. When they held their public hearing, 2 of the members were out, but they did recommend approval to you all at 2-1. And we did have a couple of speakers at the public hearing, 2 of which encouraged support, one of which expressed via writing opposition to it. As I said, they ultimately voted to recommend approval to you all, and staff recommends approval as well.
Josh, what is involved in photometric drawings? Is that something that a professional person of some sort has to come up with, or is this a back of the envelope kind of thing, or what are we talking about?
It can be.
It can be.
They typically are included as part of the site plan package by the engineer, but the engineer doesn't typically draw them. They get them from the lighting manufacturer. Every fixture out there nowadays has its own unique lighting pattern, the way it distributes light downward, typically downward. As long as you can scale the drawing they provide, you can kind of move it around on the site plan to see where it can go to meet the standards.
Okay, what about an existing building that wants to put some lights up? Okay, they don't have an engineer, they don't have a contractor, they're just somebody that wants to put up a new light fixture.
Right.
What do they need to do to satisfy the photometric drawings and fixture installation details?
We can actually help them out, the staff. Using our GIS, we can actually scan the image of that photometric drawing and what's called georeferencing. So we actually put it into the GIS, so it becomes scaled. And then again, we can see the location of that light.
What photometric drawing?
The drawing the manufacturer provides for the luminary. Each
You're
one
saying
has-
if I go to Lowe's and buy a light fixture, there will be one of these included?
In fact,
Unless somebody's returned it and didn't put all the
That never happens either. Actually, if you ever look on, I'll just say Lowe's website, at light fixtures, usually the images include the lighting dispersion diagrams. So even if they don't have them, we could, as long as they know the make of the manufacturer, we can go and find them somewhere.
Okay, so you're not talking about having to hire some professional lightician to come out and do some kind of test or something? This is
No,
all
no.
stuff that's easily found, okay.
And that would be just strictly for retrofits. Anybody doing new construction they'd go through that process anyway, so it
Okay.
would be covered.
Lumens, I know on some of our existing special uses, they have lumens on their, are regulated. How does that tie in with this?
I don't know that we went that far in terms of measuring lumens.
Well, and that's, the reason I think we may have gone overboard with regulating the lumens on these special uses. Here we're coming with something that actually is less than what those regulations or stipulations were for those. I was just wondering how we're gonna handle that.
My approach here was strictly to focus on downward projecting lighting and light trespass. And as far as I'm concerned, that limits the impact on adjacent owners. And if the lumens are high, as long as they are focused where they're supposed to be, probably not gonna be an issue for the neighbors.
Is that reasonable?
Yeah, my understanding of the big issue is how light is thrown. And as long as it's downward focused and the light fixtures are designed to be downward, that it's not as much an issue of brightness.
And your criteria is the spillover.
Yes.
Which I think is good, but it is actually contrary to some of these SUPs we have out there.
Well,
Well,
and
an SUP though is subject to specialized,
I understand, I was just curious how.
And an
this was
SUP,
going.
somebody holding an SUP can always come back and say, hey, I'd like to get a modification to these new
Okay,
standards.
you just answered my
Yeah.
question.
Okay. Any other questions for Josh?
but I would also point out that this lighting ordinance is for commercial zoning, correct? Right. So that would be different than, say, what would be permissible in terms of just brightness in a commercial might not be on a special use permit back on somebody's farm. or
And
something.
and that's Josh's point, townhouses, apartments.
Right, that's, and then, my only other question, this is the same as all of our other ordinances, complaint driven? Enforcement of it?
I'm gonna pose that question to you all. Ms. Crozier in the building department was nice enough to start doing the research on what permits have been issued that would otherwise have to comply with this. Took a little extra time, and through 2015, there's only one so far, so I don't think there's gonna be too many, but if you guys wanna do strictly complaint-based, we can absolutely do that.
I just think we need to have consistency as to whether we have enforcement or complaint driven.
No, I agree with that. I think we need to be consistent on that.
I don't care which way it goes, I just think we need to be consistent.
I prefer complaint driven.
That's-
Well, that's going to be what naturally occurs.
Right, I just wanna make sure that we,
So if I understand it, the universe that would be captured by complaint basis prior to, if you all adopt it tonight, would be maybe one facility, one business.
We have a pending complaint that would make that two, but,
Okay. So really, there's only this two businesses that could be involved.
That-
But they've got a 2-year window to come into compliance.
Right, and there's relief for them to do that.
the other thing is, I believe on commercial, by code, they have to get a building permit anyway to
Yes, sir.
do any electrical modifications.
I'm supposed to.
Thank you.
sorry to belabor the point here, do the applicability and compliance section under non-conforming lighting, maybe a question for the county attorney, should we state specifically upon receipt of a complaint?
No.
Okay.
I was gonna say that's more policy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, complaint driven, if Josh is, I think if Josh is riding up Route 20 and sees a blatant zoning violation that he feels like is a concern, I do think, I suspect he would address that. So, you know, it's gonna be 98% complaint driven, but some things are gonna be so blatant that, you know, we discover, then we gotta deal with it.
Okay, any other questions for Josh? Okay, open the public hearing. Allison, anyone signed up for?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, we currently have 4 speakers. The
Okay.
first is Mark Warren, 5290 Ridge Road.
Okay. Mr. Warren?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The proposed exterior lighting ordinance is a balanced and reasonable way to regulate commercial outdoor lighting in the county. It would be great if we didn't need this regulation. It would be great if all businesses were considerate of their residential and farm neighbors and not use excessive lighting. But unfortunately, we have some inconsiderate businesses that use their outdoor lighting not for legitimate safety or security, but rather as a form of advertising to draw attention to their business. They believe that the brighter and more obnoxious their lighting is, the better they like it. So in Orange County, where businesses are often located next to or near residential areas or farms, this inconsiderate behavior needs to be regulated. This is what the proposed ordinance does. And we ask that it be adopted, and adopted with its proposed effective date, so that the neighbors don't have to buy blackout curtains to keep this unnecessary and offensive lighting out of their homes at night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Kevin Passarello, 18454 Monteith Farm Road.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, very briefly, I support the ordinance. Again, intangible pollution in the form of light and noise can materially impact the rural character of Orange County and can violate the overall intention of the comprehensive plan to preserve that character, that rural character. Night sky is very much a key quality of life in county life, and it's quite apparent that the security and safety interests of commercial property owners can be achieved with a less intrusive alternative than lighting that we would consider violative of this ordinance. So I think it's a matter of balancing the interests against the clear purposes of the comp plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Next speaker, I believe, is Charlotte Teakin.
Correct. I concur with both the gentlemen preceding me. I hope that you will adopt this ordinance for the same reasons.
Thank you.
And the last speaker is Charlie Steelheimer?
Correct. And I can speak from right here. I would like to say the same as Mrs. Teakin did. I very much concur with the county's need for such an ordinance. There's no question that light and sound pollution are two of the most destructive elements in a rural community. And they travel for such great distances, and there are ways to keep them regulated, and the county is wise to be adopting an ordinance to keep these under control. And I would certainly echo what Mr. Warren said, that it's too bad that everyone can't understand that we have to be kind to neighbors and to others. But unfortunately, some people want to have and believe that they are creating a mecca for commerce by having brighter lighting, and which doesn't really work for a neighborhood. I can tell you, we were a mile and a half time, not where we live currently at Mount Sharon, but previous to that, the lighting was so bad that we really decided we did not want to be in that location anymore. And so I would urge you to adopt this, and very stringent controls on downlighting. That's what's important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Last speaker?
Yes, that's the last speaker.
Also, for the record, I received an email from James Collins, also supporting this ordinance. You'll indicate that. Okay. Close the public hearing.
Move that we approve.
Okay. Is there a second? Any further discussion?
Well, I think we all would agree that we really wish we didn't have to do this. It'd be a whole lot better if people use common sense when they locate or relocate a business out in a rural area. I worked with Tom on this ordinance to try to make it, tailor it to narrowly fix the problem rather than to go out and have a lot of unintended consequences and cause a lot of problems and regulate things that don't need regulation. So I think nothing's ever perfect, as we admit every time we go back and tweak something we've already done. But I think this will, I think this will definitely is a step forward, and so I support it completely.
Okay. Any other comments? Roll call, please.
Mr. White?
Aye.
Mr. Crozier?
Aye.
Mr. Frame?
Aye.
Mr. Goodwin?
Aye.
And Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. Okay, public hearing number 4, dealing with towers. Mr. Fred.
Sir, last but certainly not least this evening. This is probably a better part of a year in the making. It rewrites the telecommunications towers and facilities ordinance of the zoning ordinance. As you know, that is commonly used to stipulate conditions and other requirements on telecommunications towers, among other things. With this current ordinance being the better part of 18 years old now, it really doesn't really mesh with current industry practices or standards. It certainly doesn't mesh with you all's current telecommunications initiatives. And we really pursued a full rewrite here to address a whole host of concerns. Probably among the notable changes here, we now have administratively approved towers up to 100 feet. Those are intended to be used for small-scale cell deployment, fixed wireless and things of that nature. The SUP process for commercial towers is largely unchanged, but there are additional requirements and standards for those, particularly in the Madison Barber Rural Historic District. And then in light of you all's current initiatives, we've had a special carve-out in here for county-owned facilities to give those a little easier deployment, but still subject to a public review component. And this went to the Planning Commission earlier this year. They have recommended approval to you all, as do staff.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Frederick? I would note that the section on amateur radios is remaining largely unchanged, as I recall. That's an area that the FCC controls primarily. We have little to say other than a few guidelines, frankly. So otherwise, it's largely trying to update to the current technology and applications that we're seeing. So, okay, any other questions for Josh? All right, open the public hearing. Have anyone signed up for this public
Yes, sir,
hearing?
Mr. Chairman. We have 4 speakers.
Okay.
The first is Joe Lenig from Virginia Broadband.
Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Joe Lennick, Director of Sales and Marketing for Virginia Broadband. We are headquartered in Culpeper, but we provide internet service, fixed wireless internet service to several hundred customers in Orange County. First off, I would like to thank the Planning and Zoning Department for their guidance well over a year of chauffeuring this change through. And I also would like to thank the Planning Commission for their foresight into seeing this through as well. We highly support the proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance ZTA 17-03, Article 9. We believe that what we dub the micro-spot utility poles that we would like to install are going to bring a lot of internet to people out in rural areas. So this is fantastic that we're here at this time. I would like to make one suggestion, if I could, and that's the setbacks to the buildings. We have now erected 4 of these micro spots in 3 in Madison County and 1 in Culpeper County under various zoning regulations. And what we're discovering is, A, we like to have the top of the hill. That's the most advantageous spot of the property. That helps us propagate our signal. We like to have a clearing of trees so that we aren't right up against trees as we're trying to broadcast out. And unfortunately, what we're discovering is those beautiful pieces of property is usually where the house sits, because they want the view as well. Or that's usually where the property line is, so adjoining properties have also the top of the hill. So what I'm suggesting you may want to consider, if it is all possible, of course, is having no setback from any buildings per se. And consider these structures as an accessory structure, as other counties have deemed them. The offset or the setbacks from the property lines are in line. They're fine, and they usually don't cause an issue. It's the setback from the building that may prohibit some properties in participating in being a microspot host site. With that said, I would love to entertain any questions or any or to my suggestion that I'm offering.
We'll address that during our discussion. Okay, thank you.
Next speaker is Mark Warren, 5290 Ridge Road.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as to the cell tower amendment, the proposed changes are by and large thoughtful improvements to the existing ordinance and should be adopted, but with one exception. The one provision that many neighbors object to is the taking away of the citizens' right to the public hearing on proposed new towers of 100 feet or less. A 100-foot tower is roughly the height of a 10-story building, and most county residents want a public hearing to help evaluate a proposed cell tower of that height in their neighborhood, and not have it simply administratively approved by the county. In recent experience, the holding of public hearings on cell tower proposals has been very helpful to coming to the right decision on these issues. A public hearing forces the proponent and county staff to work their hardest to find the right location and the best mitigation, while at the same time giving the citizens an important role and the feeling that they're part of the process on such a serious issue facing their neighborhood. Taking away the public hearing on future tower proposals would exclude the neighbors from the process and perhaps encourage mischief in sort of a behind-the-scenes kind of way. Good public policy suggests that you should adopt the improvements to the ordinance, but leave in place the existing right to public hearings for all future cell tower decisions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Kevin Passarello, 18454 Monteith Farm Road.
In the interest of time, I'll defer and just support Mr. Warren's comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And the last speaker is Mr. Steelheimer.
I will follow Mr. Passarello and also agree with Mr. Warren's comments. I really don't see any reason why you would take away the public's right to a hearing. A 10-story tower is a very significant structure, particularly in the rural countryside. And people should have a right to object. As far as this gentleman's comment on proximity to a building, I don't care if somebody's stupid enough to want one through their living room, they can put it up. But let's have a public hearing on it and deal with it that way. Just to have towers spring up here, there, and the other that are 95 feet tall or 99 feet tall makes no sense at all without a public hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No more speakers.
Okay. Close the public hearing. Okay. Any thoughts, comments, gentlemen?
We just had a public hearing last month, that because of where a tower was sitting, it's a taller cell tower, so there are reasons for the setbacks. I understand the concern about how close to the house, and there is a provision where there can be an administrative setback change from buildings. And I believe that's the reason it's in there. As Mr. Solheimer said, if somebody wants to put it through their house, well, that's their house. It's not the neighbor's house. Also, part of the reason, at least I believe, part of the reason for the 100-foot, right now, the state is already decided 50 feet, you can do whatever you want. The county has no jurisdiction. And there was a lot of discussion of bumping that to 100 feet. So instead of having to rewrite the ordinance within months to come in compliance with the state's code, I believe that was one of the reasons for that in there. I know there were others, but that was one of the thought processes. I don't have anything else on it.
Okay. Anyone else?
Is that the, is Jim's recollection there correct? Is the state currently 50 foot?
Yeah, I think it's 50. But the state is having ongoing discussions, every General Assembly session, about taking more and more of our ability to regulate away anyway.
Well, they're also differentiating between the use, their cell towers, cell phone companies are gaming.
They're lobbying heavily.
And lobbying to get basically be exempted from almost all local discretion.
And when different localities put a lot of restrictions on, that provides more evidence for the General Assembly to make it even worse.
The legislation did pass to 50 feet, and basically the industry's argument is that there's a tension between people in rural areas particularly, or in urban areas frankly, wanting wireless broadband, mobile broadband service. This is not cell phone, this is mobile broadband data services. And at the same time, when the industry wants to meet that market demand, the localities, particularly with microcells that are 100 feet or less, 50 feet with the new 5G technology, is blocking the deployment of that. And so it was pretty much a tussle, but industry won out at 50 feet. The conventional logic is that 50 feet won't be enough, it needs to go up to 100 feet, because I think Mr. Lennig points out that seems to be the sweet spot for certainly mobile 5G service. So
Well,
essentially, this is the state's usurping local land use decision-making. I'm sorry, Mr. White.
No, the 100 feet is, I think that's what they're going to be pressing for, because it has to be that to really clear the tree canopy in many cases, especially deciduous trees. And so,
Mr. Chairman, I might make just one suggestion for your consideration. At the top of page 6 of 10 of the ordinance before you, it deals with the setback distances for these administratively approved towers. Right now, the way that's worded is that the setback of the tower is equal to the height,
right.
which is pretty absolute. There may be situations, I don't see them coming to you very frequently, but there may be situations where you want the ability to reduce that. You may want to figure writing in a special exception provision if that's something that you all want to consider.
We make an exception for towers with break points, but it sounds like maybe that it, in addition to including the break point design, that there could be other circumstances where at least the specifics should be considered.
And
Yeah, I'm not, you're saying it's on page 6 of 10, because I'm not,
Yeah, it's,
what line number is that?
It becomes a bit confusing because the planning commission's resolution of approval is in your packet and the board's ordinance.
Oh, okay, I'm looking at the board's ordinance, so is that on page 8?
On the board's ordinance, it's at the top of page 6. If you're looking at the planning commission one that has the line numbers, it's about line 140.
the board package one, it's the very top section.
144, yes. It's at the top of page 5.
I will say really quickly, the nice thing about the special exception, not only does it allow flexibility for you all, but it also allows public concerns to be voiced, because obviously that is a public hearing, so you kind of kill two birds there.
Give me, now, has everybody found that section? We're gonna
I'm
have
still
Josh-
looking, because I'm looking at what we were given ahead of time, and I'm guessing now the board
It
stuff
had-
was not even in that. Is
No,
that
the
right?
board's ordinance had not been prepared at that time, yes, sir.
Can you
But in that printed packet, it's on page 5 and it's line 144 is what Josh is referencing.
Setback distances? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Okay.
No.
Well, to the issue of the setbacks, and I'm on page 8 of 10, it's line 272, and this is in the planning commission package. I don't understand, it says the setback should be at least 500 feet from all existing off-site dwellings, and shall also be set back from all existing on-site and off-site buildings, a distance equal to the height of the TAS. So, we've got 500 feet from houses? Is that what it means? I mean, that's what it means by dwelling?
Correct, and we kept, that was a carryover from the current ordinance, that was unchanged.
Okay, and then it's, if it was a 100-foot tower, then it would be 100 foot from a barn or something like that on another piece of property. Is that correct?
You're correct.
Okay. Now,
And that's for SUP towers greater than 100 feet, that section. Because you're in section 70-852. The section Josh was referring to is back a page for the towers 100 or less. Which also has setback distances on item number 2. And that's the line 144 that Allison was pointing to. Give me your language again, Josh, that you to consider as a change here. I heard you, but I didn't actually locate where it would be.
Bear with me, I'm gonna come up with this on the spot.
No, I understand. You had it once, but we moved on.
That's always risky.
And I didn't write it down, so.
well, my question, though, is why we are, my question stands in either case. Why are we moving the tower from buildings on the property? Why do we have a setback to buildings that are on the property?
I'm assuming it's an insurance or a safety issue if the tower comes down and, takes some part of the building out. The only reason I'm aware of. Maybe that's the owner of the property's issue, but
I understand the setback from the, from.
Property lines.
From
Yeah.
property lines or from structures on other properties. I don't really understand the idea of, because, I mean, some people put up their ham radio tower right beside their house. It's like outside their bedroom window.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so I
And
don't
they're
think.
hundreds of feet in some
Yeah,
cases.
yeah, and they're up to hundred ninety-nine feet, I think. So they do it by right up to 199. I think you can go higher than that.
50 towers on this property.
Yeah.
Beyond that, you need a light.
So we are trying to spread broadband across the county as best we can, and I just wonder if that isn't a restriction
constraint.
that doesn't need to be in there.
Particularly for the ones in this section. As you go to the larger towers,
The larger
I'm-
tower makes
I'm-
more sense.
yeah, I'm a little bit more concerned. I don't know if the numbers are correct, whether it should be 500 and 100, but,
And for the height, Tom, can we list it as, the height as what's set by ordinance from the state?
We
So
could,
that, so that we're in compliance with them, but we don't have to rewrite the thing if they change it?
well, assuming that we can incorporate a state code section by reference, but that assumes that they'll use that section, and they won't write something, a lot of times they use a new
They
section.
changed a different section.
Yeah.
So, that's the one risk, you can incorporate a state code section by reference.
Well,
but-
I didn't want, because that's an issue, but something that says that we set the height for hearings versus, to be set with the same standard that the state has, and not reference an actual code.
I always feel more comfortable if we actually reference a code section. I think if the state changes it to 125 feet, we're gonna have to go amend our ordinance anyway, so.
Well, that's why I was asking if we can, if there's a way that we can do it so that we don't have to go back and hold another public hearing to do the same thing. all
We
over
could
again.
add a comma or such greater height as mandated by state law,
Josh, now that you're finished with that, was there a reasoning behind the 100 feet from any structure on the owner's property?
I think we approach that from a safety standpoint, but I could certainly see if not something the owner cares about, there's no reason to have that.
No, and it's,
Did that answer your question, Mr. Watt?
Well, I'm inclined to let that issue be between the owner and his or her insurance company.
well, in the amateur radio, section, there is no setback there.
No,
at all.
that, we have no
None.
choice there, that's right.
So we got a
So
tower that's
we're in the
100
position
feet.
of saying you can have a 199-foot, if it's a ham radio tower, you can have it outside your bedroom window, but if it's not a ham radio tower, then anything over 100 feet, or anything up to 100 feet, 60 feet, it's gotta be a certain distance away.
Are we comfortable enforcing the underlying zoning district setbacks, period? Is that what I'm hearing? Because one could certainly put a period after the word district.
Well, I'm not sure that we shouldn't have it, the height of the tower back from any off or a setback, because you're falling, you got a tower falling on an adjacent property.
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about the adjacent property reducing the setback, just for
Just the on-site.
on-site.
Yeah, so you would just take out on-site and.
Take out on-site.
You're not endangering your neighbors, you would only be doing yourself.
Yeah, if you take out on-site.
Because the whole issue of the zoning setback is to the adjacent property.
Yeah,
So we just take the, from all existing on-site period.
No, off-site. Strike on-site and say, existing off-site buildings, the distance equal to the height of the antenna.
You want to keep that, don't you?
Yeah, you keep, that's the part you keep.
Okay.
Did you get that, Josh? You're striking the words on-site and.
Got it. That solves the question of the setback unless you want to be able to grant a special exception for off-site setbacks, reducing those, so.
If you
We'll
got
see
it
how
off-
that goes.
you want
I'd be reluctant to do that because you're potentially affecting someone else's property there. I don't,
Whether you expect, whether you,
I don't think a company like yours would even want to do that, so, nor should we address it. The other question we heard during the public hearing dealt with the,
special use. or the-
well, with public hearings for, and the comment was specifically cell towers, but I'm assuming that means towers without regard to what kind of antennas on. You mentioned that you had a thought that might, the issue is that, with these, the intent was to have these, quote, smaller towers, be administratively approved. Which does not require a public hearing. The larger towers, which require SUPs, of course, public hearings involved there. I'm just looking to see. Josh, are you, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna ask, typically the 100-foot towers are monopoles, they're not lattice-type structures.
Well, they can be lattice. I mean,
Well,
there's
yeah, narrow gauge lattice then.
there's an outfit down in Louisiana putting up, you know,
Narrow.
it's a dad and a son going out and putting these things up, and they're lattice, but they're little aluminum things.
We have to be careful with that. Just a quick Google search, they make, monopoles up to 9-foot wide lattice towers for those, so you have to be a little careful with what we're actually allowing administratively.
Well, you limit the base. Somewhere I saw it. 36 inches.
To not exceed 100 feet.
I guess the question, Josh, is a matter of
Maximum base 36.
implementation policy on these administratively approved towers. Would you contemplate any notification to neighboring property owners as part of this process or not? Would you treat it like a rezoning or SUP application or something like that? How would you implement that section?
The way this is worded, it's basically treated like a site plan and a zoning permit submittal. And it's mostly the case of just checking the box, did I submit all the required elements? We could write in a notification to all adjoining owners, just as a for your information type thing, but that would invite.
That's still no public hearing.
Right, and it's almost, I don't know how well that'll be received, because you're basically saying, hey, look what your neighbor's doing, but you don't get to say anything about it. I would just
Yeah,
caution.
you give them a notification, and you might get some flack back. But there wouldn't be any other,
Well, yeah, and that appears to be, I'll look to the county attorney for some guidance or creative thinking. I mean, the idea of administrative approval versus the later version of the SUP process, they can't be the same thing. You either have an administrative approval or you go through the SUP.
Right, the
And
whole
you can't- you
purpose of
can't-
administrative approval is to say, okay, we don't consider these to be significant enough impact that
Right.
we feel like it needs to go through the full-blown SUP process. And so then therefore we'll trust staff to review these and approve them.
And I would add now, I think it's effective July 1, if it's 50 feet or less, they don't even need to submit the first plan to us.
Yeah, we don't even get notified.
They'll get a building permit for electrical hookup and all that. So, you know, if it's 51 feet or 75 feet, then it would go through a whole SUP process.
I might make a off-the-cuff suggestion. I think the comments that I've heard from the public so far have been based on what you can see from a public road. So for the administrative approval towers, you might want to consider if it's within a certain distance of a primary road or a major road, that triggers the SUP. Otherwise, it's just an administratively approved item. Just something to kick around.
The problem is, most of these that I've at least seen pictures of or actually seen myself are, you know, a wooden pole, like an electric pole or a light pole, with either a fiberglass or other structure just on top of it with the antenna, and so you're, you know.
Yeah, but those aren't usually going 100. Those are the 50 footers. Not too many.
They can get, maybe not quite 100, but I mean, they're, you know, by the time you get the antenna piece on top of it, you're moving up, so. Anyone have thoughts on the matter?
Well, this does slow down, I mean, if you go to a public hearing, you do slow down the ability to build these things and distribute communications throughout the, and a part of our providing service to the public is to make sure that, and high-speed internet and these other communications are critical to our citizens.
Since we're mainly rural, that's where we're trying to put them.
And we have companies that are trying to do this.
Yeah.
We heard from one tonight, as a matter of fact. And I know of a couple of others that have approached me.
I think what Josh said was, I mean, I might want to think about what Josh is saying here. He's suggesting we add some, leave it as an administrative approval, but put some more restrictions on it in terms of distance from a road, perhaps distance from a property line. I'm not, you know, and screening and those, I mean, we can put restrictions on that, so I mean, right now, there's you know, the Madison Barber Rural Historic District, 500 feet of the right-of-way of Germanna Highway, 1,000 feet of Virginia Scenic Byway. So in other words, we've already got some in there, so we'd be adding some restrictions onto that.
The unfortunate part of that is if it's a 50-foot pole, they can stick it right on the side of the road without anything from us.
Well, and I'll tell you, if 5G takes hold, that's what you're gonna see.
Right.
Every street light, every electric pole is gonna have an antenna on it, because that's the only way 5G works.
Very short range.
Very short range. Feet.
That was one of the industry's main contentions going forward, is that working with Dominion, the co-ops, to be able to co-locate, because there's power and there's height, and that the cells for these are gonna be more and more smaller, which means more antennas. And the way the General Assembly was treating this was a more industry-led effort than anything having to do with land use regulation.
Well, I mean, to Jim's point, they can put the 50-foot ones out there now because the state basically says they can.
Right.
I assume, I mean, I don't know what, they're allowed to do it by right. I don't know that they're allowed to do it anywhere they want to by right. I mean, you can't be in the, I don't think you can be in the right of way of the road, can they? Without getting permission from VDOT.
Well, no, but they can put it as far out as,
The microcells are an exception. They can go with the VDOT administrative permit, but those are typically located on existing utility poles, and they don't really extend the height, so you don't really see them. That's a kind of a unique carve-out.
one of the things with VDOT is if you go up and down any interstates, you'll see some 300-foot lattice poles. Those are from the Governor Allen administration that allowed VDOT to open up those in return for fiber being along the interstate right-of-way. The way it's all working out is VDOT is the largest landowner in the state, if you look at right-of-way. And a lot of their right-of-way is not just roads, it's excess right-of-way that may have been acquired and never used. And so a lot of the telecommunication companies, particularly the wireless telecommunications, are looking for those sites, and they don't need any, because it's state property, there's no local regulation on it. So you'll start seeing some more of those things happening along major corridors that are not interstates.
So what are you thinking about, Jim? A certain distance back from, we've got a good share of the roads already defined, we'd probably add some more to it. What's the distance back from 500 feet? Or 1,000?
500 feet, yeah.
500?
500.
1,000 feet from the scenic byway.
Okay.
Or 1,000 feet from any property listed in the historic or national landmarks and these kind of things.
So what other class of roads would you consider?
Well, you've got general, primary, and or secondary.
Where are we at on this, Tom, in terms of what we advertised and if we change?
Yeah, we can, I mean, all of the discussions we're having so far, I don't consider them significant changes, so.
Well, we're not adding, I mean, we're granting new, rights with this, and,
Based
if
on
we
what we
grant less than
advertised.
what we advertised, that's not it.
I'm just pulling up the state code on this 50 feet, because I was just going by memory, so I just pulled it up, the new legislation. We still can require an administrative review even on 50-foot towers. It's just the limits that we can, I mean, we can basically review it for compliance with utility regulations, et cetera. And the state actually does have some things we can say that it can't be more than 10 feet above the tallest existing utility pole in the area, not in the boundaries of local, state, or federal historic districts. So, I mean, we do still have, even now with this new 50-foot law that's taking effect, there is still some regulatory ability, just not much.
Well, I would move that we change that to, that we add in a setback from the public roads of 250 feet.
The problem with that is you're going to eliminate many properties from being able to have them then. Because their lots don't go back 250 feet.
Well,
They don't get to make money off of the pole.
Right.
They don't get to have a football stadium either because they don't have, I'm not sure I understand.
Well, these are for individual use towers.
We're not, this is just for the administrative, we're not saying they could come in with an SUP.
Oh, okay, just for the administrative.
Yeah, this is just to address the
I have no problem.
the administrative, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. SUPs are, that section, I'm in the
Administrative review.
yeah, I'm in 7851, administratively approved telecommunications towers and facilities.
One thing we could do, and if, in that section, Mark, if you look at paragraph 4, called standard design criteria, and it's talking about colors and structure and things like that, maybe we could add, and I haven't thought this through, but what I'm thinking about is an either-or situation, that there's either, some amount of buffering from the state road, or a minimum setback. And you achieve one of those two. And you could have, to use your number, you either have, 100 feet of mature hardwood buffering or 200 feet, as a sort of a middle.
So you put the setback, over the roads, but, give them an exemption if they've got buffering?
I'm trying to anticipate what situations we're gonna,
No, I think that's an acceptable idea. I do have to notice that it's kind of funny. Number 2 under 4 is constructed of metal should be maintaining a rust-free and corrosion-free state and shall not cause undue glare to neighboring properties. If you let the thing rust, then it will glare.
be better off to let it rust.
And these big electric lines, once they rust up, they look like huge trees.
Yeah, they look
you
like-
know. Well,
look like
but
that.
then, you have to use your imagination, but, you know. So I think we're kind of working against ourselves there. No rust, but they can't glare either. Well, I'm open to what Jim's saying about, you know,
Maybe
putting
we
a
had
combination of.
subparagraph 4 there that offers either a setback and or buffering.
Well, we need to put it in the setback section. I think you need to talk something about the setback from the roads. Or somewhere else you gotta do that, because this is a design criteria.
Well, the one above that, special design, and that's where it deals with the setbacks in the historic district.
Okay.
That's the only reason, because that deals with specific cases
So
there,
you'd,
and then for everything else, it's number 4.
Okay.
That's the only reason I
Oh,
pointed
you're
there.
talking, okay.
It
under-
says TAS located outside.
Well, you could put a reference under number 2. You could put a reference to, setback distances, you know, and then a reference down to 4.
Right.
Get a cup of coffee, Brian?
No, I'm fine. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
All right.
Let's see,
We ready to write it on the fly here, or we wanna?
we can try. I'm trying to see if we had anything in the next section on buffering. Do you recall, Josh?
All right.
I'm just seeing if we had words already with a different number.
No.
That's an SUP, so it has to fit the individual situation, so.
So if we change special design, if the TAS is located within 250 feet of a road, and that's paragraph 3, the tower is located within 250 feet of road, comma, the Madison Barber Rural, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, you're back up in the upper section there.
Well, I can put it there too.
Well,
I'm just.
Do you have any suggestions, Joe?
The other section, we're talking about buildings and property lines.
yeah.
Joe,
So
This would take,
if you're going under number 3, you could do it after the, you know, within 250 feet of any primary or secondary road. And then reference down to the other location where you could do it closer, but it would have to be subject to.
yeah.
Is that,
Adequate buffering or
to
something.
adequate buffer.
Josh, did you have a suggestion or maybe a line with Mr. Johnson?
Just so I understand, the goal is that towers within 250 feet of a road, that they just have special criteria, not necessarily a special approval. Am I understanding that?
Well, in order to qualify for an administrative approval,
You need to be 250 feet
they
off
have to
the
be
road.
250 feet off the road
Buffered.
or, you know, have to have, and I like Jim's suggestion of 100 foot of hardwoods. And that's,
I think, if we just treat them as special design, and someone had made the suggestion earlier, I think that would accommodate the concerns.
So if you just say located within,
I think you can use the standard design, but I think you have to have something that limits it, because the standard design is not where the limits, those are the mitigating features in subparagraph 4.
yeah, I think he was talking about using 3 though.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, and put it in,
Maybe all you,
Just add it on there, within 250 feet of any primary or secondary road.
yeah,
I think that's all you have to do, because
Yeah.
it talks about the buffering
Because then it
later
goes
on.
into the buffer.
okay.
Minor administrative point, do we want that to be from the right of way or from the center line of the road, edge of pavement? It does make a difference, I hate to
Yes,
say that.
yes,
Well, if it's a public road, if it's a primary or secondary road, it probably needs to be from the center line, because we don't know where some of the right-of-ways are apparently. And we've learned that.
We are able to usually determine what the center line of the road is.
But we can usually get close, a first-order approximation at least. of
yeah,
what
with
it's
regard to the others, we have a better idea where the right-of-way is. Route 3, historic places,
at. Yeah, hopefully we know that.
historic district.
So if I may recap the proposed language here, special design criteria, if I'm understanding correctly. If the TAS is located within 250 feet of the center line of any primary or secondary road, comma, within the Madison Barber, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, or I would probably put it down where you're talking about but it doesn't really matter. I mean, the Madison Barber Rural Historic District, that's within the district, anything within the district, so it's not, that's not a distance issue there.
Yeah,
So I would put it after that. I'd say within 250 feet of any primary or secondary road, then go on into 500 feet from Germanna Highway and so forth.
okay, put it in after historic district
Right.
instead of before, okay.
Now, the question is, do you say except as provided in number 4 below and do the buffering? To Jim's point, I am concerned about, 250 feet on some lots is it's a lot of distance.
But so you don't have it, so you're saying you can't put it on a roadside lot? Put it on the lot behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we have all kinds of requirements in here that make certain pieces of land can't be used for that.
That's right.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
That's the nature of zoning.
Well, if you own a valley, you're not gonna have a cell tower
Nobody's gonna wanna buy it.
or broadband tower.
Unless it's a really
I mean,
tall one.
You need a hill. So,
All right,
All right, we'll try it with that if it, there is also always the special exception process if we run into it.
okay.
Well, you were talking about the buffering. Were you talking about a separate buffering for that?
Well, if you're gonna set it up as an either or, either the 250 or, let's say, 100 feet of hardwood, you need to say that somewhere. You need to
Well,
say
but
the
we
or.
really didn't set it. We just put it in line with these other things under the special design criteria. So it's saying if it's within that, concealment shall be required in accordance with any of the following. So,
That's why it needs to be
So
less
why-
than 200, I don't know what your words, not greater than or equal to.
Right.
So it has to say, that puts it within.
well, the reading is within 500 feet of the right-of-way of Germanna Highway, so if it's within 250 feet of the primary or
And
secondary
then you do these
road,
buffering things.
then the buffering kicks in, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the following, the second,
I think that fixes it. As long as it's, I'm not sure the words that Josh first used said within. I thought it should be, but
well, that's what we're using. We use it, the other places within 500 feet,
Right.
within 1,000 feet, so we say
Within
within 250 feet of a primary, or the
secondary.
center line of a primary or secondary road.
Right, okay. All right, any other items?
And we are going forward with the,
And we've
On-site
and we've
and.
deleted the on-site and.
Correct. Any other changes, comments, questions?
Motion to approve is modified.
Okay.
Do we have the specific language? I mean, I'm not,
I got it on mine.
Mr.
Josh.
Frame,
Huh?
would you mind reciting what you have written?
Yes. We say, if the TAS is located within the Madison Barber Rural Highway or Historic District, comma, within 250 feet of the center line of a primary or secondary road, comma, within 500 feet, okay?
Continues on there. And then the only other change is deletion of, above that of the,
Page on line 146, deletion of on-site and.
I have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any other discussion? Roll call, please, Allison.
Mr. Frame,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Crozier,
Aye.
Mr. Goodwin,
Aye.
and Mr. White.
Aye. Okay. That looks like the end of our business for this evening. I need one.